A lone soldier carves a brutal path through a relentless horde of skeletal monsters. He launches himself into the air, bringing his blade down in a vicious targeted strike. Screaming pure fury, he vows to permanently erase the source of the undead. The glowing sword drops toward a seemingly defenseless target mere inches from a lethal blow, but right before impact a brilliant purple star-shaped light flares in the target's eye. Crackling with raw energy, an ancient hidden power finally awakens. In a flash, the target shifts his stance, perfectly mirroring a legendary technique from his memories. The attacker's eyes go wide with absolute disbelief as he recognizes the secret form. And then a massive wave of purple energy erupts, countering the strike with devastating jaw-dropping force. But to understand how we reached this insane clash, we have to rewind the clock to the very beginning. A desolate snow-covered battlefield was littered with the grim aftermath of a brutal war. A defeated man with dark hair bled heavily into the snow, coughing up crimson as the cold realization hit him. His wounds were absolutely fatal. A massive glowing cross-hilted sword is planted squarely in his chest, right through the heart. Standing over him, a party of battered warriors pants in exhausted relief, celebrating the fact that they finally took down their greatest enemy. They stare down at the absolute menace they call the devil of the continent. This is Necromancer Archimond, and as he grips the holy blade tearing through his torso, his life rapidly slips away. Coughing up blood, the dark mage realizes he is firmly knocking on death's door. He remembers it clearly. For 10 brutal years the Great Continental War raged on, ending only when the joint Imperial forces completely shattered his defensive lines in a crushing defeat. A knight in gleaming blue armor approaches. Burkul Rhineland, leader of the Northern Knight Order and the sole reason for Archimond's downfall. The Holy Knight stops before his bleeding enemy, openly admitting that he didn't secure this victory entirely on his own. He solemnly honors the countless allies who bled and died just to give him the opening to land that fatal strike. Looming over his fallen foe, Burkul demands that the Necromancer finally surrender so the continent can know true peace. But Archimond isn't having any of this self-righteous monologuing, furiously screaming at the knight to shut his mouth. He violently calls out their hypocrisy, accusing the so-called heroes of sitting on their hands while innocent people died from the plague, making their sudden cries for peace absolutely sickening. Burkul just stares down at him, his expression completely unreadable as he absorbs the bitter rant. Archimond spits blood, condemning every last one of these so-called righteous warriors as nothing but absolute hypocrites. Refusing to go quietly, the dying Necromancer forces his remaining mana to surge, wrapping himself in a terrifying, desperate aura of magic. The surrounding troops immediately flinch back in sheer terror. Panic ripples through the ranks as they realize this absolute madman is trying to cast a massive necromancy spell with his literal dying breath. A panicked soldier begs Burkul to finish him off before it's too late, but the commander coldly orders his men to stand down. Archimond remembers it clearly. 20 million innocent people fell to the plague, and he raised every last one of them as a massive undead army, an atrocity that sparked this hellish war. Archimond violently grinds his teeth, scoffing at the accusation. He glares right through his executioner, accusing Burkul of waging this entire 10-year crusade purely for personal revenge because his own hometown was caught in the crossfire. The howling wind is the only sound as Burkul stands perfectly still, offering zero denial to the heavy charge. Instead, the stoic knight finally breaks his silence to reveal the real reason he drew his blade. Gripping his sword, he declares that he fights solely for the future of the children. The dark sorcerer is completely stunned, his body freezing up at the sheer selflessness of the answer. Burkul explains that his own convictions, his choices and his hopes are all things he must gladly abandon for the sake of the next generation. Staring back at his own corrupted, bloodied reflection, Archimond is struck by the bitter contrast. In the knight's unwavering gaze he sees a man who stands tall for a cause far greater than himself. A dramatic beam of sunlight pierces through the heavy dark clouds above the battlefield. Bathed in that light, Burkul's noble resolve highlights just how entirely different it is from the Necromancer's own selfish, hollow motives. Utterly defeated in both body and spirit, Archimond collapses heavily to his knees in a pool of his own blood. Bowing his head with weapons still protruding from his back, he accepts his fate and tells the knight to finish the job. But shockingly, Burkul drops his glowing red holy sword, letting it clatter to the dirt as his comrades cry out in protest. Instead, the knight draws a completely different blade, this one etched with ominous glowing purple runes. Leveling the dark weapon at the kneeling sorcerer, Burkul coldly asks if he has any last words. With blood dripping from his face, Archimond delivers a chilling final warning, promising that a necromancer doesn't die easily. But before the dark sorcerer can even finish his curse, Burkul swings his glowing purple blade, slicing right through him in a massive eruption of dark blood. A massive shockwave ripples across the battlefield as the surrounding soldiers erupt into cheers, officially declaring the devil of the continent dead. Beneath the roar of victory, Archimond listens to the grim thud of his own severed head hitting the dirt. His vision narrows to a tiny slit, the defeated man quietly reflecting that this is truly the end of his reign and the 10-year war. In his mind he feels his consciousness tumbling endlessly through a dark starry void. The comic cuts to a grand Gothic estate being battered by a heavy thunderstorm. Inside, a brown-haired maid and a black-haired maid stare down in absolute shock at something off-screen. It turns out they're watching a baby with silver hair, whose tiny mouth is twitching while an internal voice questions what is going on. Greeting him warmly, the black-haired maid asks if he slept well, officially revealing that the dreaded Necromancer has just been reincarnated as young Master Klein. The caretakers cheerfully direct our boy's attention to a glowing portrait of a white-haired woman, introducing the Duchess as his new mother. Trapped in this tiny new vessel, our hero realizes his limbs feel stiff as a board while the women try to coax him into speaking. They aggressively encourage him to call for his mother, and my guy squeezes his eyes shut, trembling as he strains to force out his very first syllables. The caretakers are practically vibrating out of their shoes, shaking the portrait in sheer hype as they wait for that precious first word. But instead of a cute baby babble, the infant's eyes snap wide open as he belts out a full-blown high-tier necromancy summoning incantation. The sheer whiplash leaves the women paralyzed, dropping the heavy frame straight to the floor as the tiny overlord demands his dark army heed his call. Right on cue, a massive bolt of blue lightning rips across the stormy sky to really sell the villainous aesthetic. The terrified maids let out blood-curdling screams that echo across the rain-soaked estate, realizing this baby has some serious final boss energy. 15 years later, the stormy skies have cleared over the sunny, peaceful manor grounds. A group of maids huddle together outside, completely starstruck by a figure passing by. They absolutely swoon over the young man's flawless aesthetic as he glides past them. Our boy has officially grown into an insanely handsome, silver-haired noble with drip that belongs in a museum. The women whisper excitedly about Klein's blinding god-tier visuals, wondering what kind of holy diet produces a face like that. But despite the fan club, my guy just keeps walking with a deadpan, entirely unbothered expression. That cool demeanor shatters instantly when an unseen attacker ambushes him from above, dumping a bucket of water straight onto his head. The attacker is a heavily scarred priest, who violently empties the bucket over our hero's head while screaming at the evil spirit to be gone. Priest Garrison Veerman squints in confusion, claiming that just a second ago our guy was giving off a seriously demonic glare. Turning to the terrified maids, the holy man proudly justifies his unhinged assault, claiming he just saved them all from being bewitched. Completely drenched and thoroughly unamused, our boy deadpans a response, asking if Garrison isn't exhausted from doing this pointless purification routine every single day. But Garrison insists it's absolutely necessary, visualizing the dark, glowing-eyed soul of Archimonde that supposedly slumbers inside the teen's body. The silver-haired noble flat-out denies being the fallen mage, but the priest just takes that as proof of demonic possession and sprays him right in the face with a bottle of holy water. Standing there dripping wet, the young master internally questions if this guy has completely lost his marbles. Deciding he doesn't have the patience for this, he spins on his heel and marches off, loudly muttering a string of insults under his breath. Not letting his target escape, Garrison barks at his subordinates to grab him, sending our hero sprinting for his life in a total panic. The priest threatens him with a completely naked holy water bath if he doesn't submit, prompting the fleeing teen to desperately scream out that his name is Klein. As he books it across the courtyard, Klein reflects on the sheer irony of his miserable situation, because he knows for a fact that he definitely died on that battlefield. He remembers it clearly. After his head was chopped off, he woke up in a tiny baby's body, only to accidentally shout a high-level necromancy incantation as his very first words. Thanks to that little slip-up, the terrified adults treated the toddler like a literal raid boss, locking him away in a monastery the second he turned 3. It was in that gloomy confinement cell where he first crossed paths with the Holy Order's most unhinged clergyman. The massive, imposing silhouette of Garrison loomed in the doorway, blocking out the light. Flashing a sinister smile, the scarred priest made it crystal clear that the nightmare was just getting started. The poor kid had to tank nonstop, 24-hour prayer chants that literally made his ears bleed. He was subjected to freezing garlic baths, shivering violently as the fanatic dumped buckets of ice over his head. Garrison even went full Inquisition, tying the boy to a burning cross for a fiery purification ritual. The young boy's desperate screams for help echoed across the monastery walls. 5 years after finally escaping that hellhole, an utterly exhausted Klein sits slumped on the floor wearing a ridiculous party hat. His personal maid, Erin, kneels beside him, dramatically praying for the young master to grow into a healthy, heroic member of the family. Our hero listens to her overly pious speech with maximum annoyance, sweat dropping down his face as his patience hits zero. Snapping from the sheer frustration, our guy aggressively rips the party hat off his head and chucks it through the air. Erin gasps in absolute horror, looking utterly heartbroken as she cries out that the hat was handmade. Instant regret washes over our boy as he realizes he just trashed her hard work, sweating bullets while he issues a sincere, frantic apology. He quickly bends down to retrieve the discarded headgear, only for Erin to drop a massive plot twist. She didn't knit it, Priest Garrison did. The young master completely blue screens, freezing mid-crouch with his fingers inches from the fabric. Sheer, unadulterated terror violently jolts through him as the realization of whose work he just ruined sets in. Right on cue, the scarred priest materializes out of the shadows directly behind him, his voice dripping with ominous intent. But instead of throwing a smite, the hulking man actually wipes away a single tear, deeply moved that his young charge wore the hat he spent a whole week painstakingly knitting. All the guilt instantly leaves my guy's body, replaced by pure spite as he flashes a vein-popping smile and rips the hat straight down the middle right in front of the priest's face. Total chaos erupts off-screen as Garrison dramatically shrieks about Archimonde's evil soul manifesting, while Klein aggressively demands a refund on his wasted guilt. The shouting match is abruptly interrupted by the arrival of Captain Dunkel, who respectfully bows and asks if the daily purification ritual is finally over. The Knight Captain flashes an awkward sweat drop, gently pointing out that the wild rumors about Klein being the reincarnated devil are over a decade old at this point. Garrison doesn't even blink, casually palming our hero by the entire face to restrain his furious struggling while he listens to the captain's report. Without missing a beat, the scarred priest hurls our guy face first into the floorboards just so he can snap a perfectly respectful response to the knight. Sporting a fresh lump on his head, our hero glares up from the hardwood, absolutely baffled by the musclehead's sudden switch to polite small talk. Our guy silently judges the absolute hypocrisy of this two-faced holy man as Dunkel finally excuses himself from the chaotic scene. But before the priest can fully step out, Garrison pauses, shooting a sharp side eye over his shoulder. He drops the polite act, ominously reminding the knight that there's always a tiny possibility the reincarnation rumors are dead on, leaving our boy sweating bullets on the floor. With that heavy thought hanging in the air, the priest officially clocks out and hits the road. The priest instantly reverts to his troll persona, cheerfully waving goodbye from the doorway and reminding Klein to wash up for his next scheduled purification on Friday, while the teen screams at him to get lost. Left behind with his household staff, our boy is completely drained, panting like he just survived a boss fight. He lets out a frustrated curse and flops heavily onto the nearest ornate couch. Crossing his arms, he bitterly complains about the daily physical abuse, questioning if that brute is even a legitimate member of the clergy. The maid with pinkish-red twin tails steps up to offer him a towel, casually asking point-blank if he's absolutely sure he isn't the ancient devil. Lying through his teeth, this guy vehemently denies the accusation, putting on his best innocent face and claiming he absolutely despises the name. But internally our boy is sweating bullets, fully admitting to himself that the rumors are 100% true. He's just keeping his mouth shut so he doesn't get waterboarded with holy magic again. A grim vision flashes in his mind's eye, showing his current teenage self standing back to back with his past life as the devil. A bitter reminder of the 7 long years he spent locked in a monastery over a childhood rumor. Snapping back to reality, my hour keeps venting about the abusive clergyman, but the dark-haired man chimes in, pointing out that their resident torturer actually holds the heavy title of proxy. The maid with pinkish-red twin tails tilts her head, completely lost on the lore, and asks if that means the guy is some kind of high-ranking VIP. The dark-haired man pauses for a second, mulling over how best to explain the local power scaling. He paints a mental picture of the priest's holy robes and text, explaining that proxy is a title reserved strictly for the absolute strongest heavy hitters in the entire holy order. The explanation shifts to an imagined visual of a massive, broad-shouldered noble stomping down a hallway, with the dark-haired man noting that outside of the monstrous dukes of House Rhineland, a proxy's strength is completely unmatched. The maid with pinkish-red twin tails throws a hand up in excitement, hyping up how insanely overpowered our hero's family is, while Klein just sits there with a towel draped over his head looking utterly defeated. She casually follows up by asking who the absolute strongest duke in the family is, a question that makes the young master visibly flinch. Smiling, the dark-haired man confidently answers that while they're all top tier, the current 7th duke, Klein's own father, easily takes the number 1 spot. The dark-haired man tries to elaborate, but our boy cuts him off cold with a single flat denial. Staring dead ahead with a stone-cold expression, this guy resolutely declares that the first duke is, without a doubt, the strongest of them all. The dark-haired man is completely stunned into silence by that absolute conviction. He awkwardly concedes the point, while the maid with pinkish-red twin tails cheerfully assumes our boy just has a favorite ancestor. She points out that the young master is always staring up at the first duke's portrait anyway. Nodding along, the dark-haired man casually mentions that it's already been 2 centuries since the first duke founded their noble house. Klein just stares at the painting, that 200-year time frame echoing in his mind. As he gazes into those painted blue eyes, he finally pieces together the impossible new reality of his lineage. The comic pans across the shadowed portraits of the family's lineage, tracking from the 7th duke all the way back up the line, stopping right on the pristine gilded portrait of the first duke himself, Berkel Rhineland. A drop of sweat rolls down Klein's face as the cosmic joke fully lands. The devil of the continent has been reincarnated as the direct descendant of the very hero who executed him. In a flashback to 200 years ago, the nightmare started the exact same way, with a frantic voice screaming the name Berkel into the void of his mind. A bloodied face snarled from the pitch-black recesses of his memory, spitting out half-finished motives. The vision peaked as a towering, monstrous shadow entity loomed over the northern night in a terrifying display of power, ending the flashback. Our boy jolts awake in a cold sweat, gasping for air like he just barely survived a sleep paralysis demon. He sits on the edge of his ridiculously ornate bed, panting heavily as he tries to shake off the lingering dread. Wiping his mouth, our guy curses the absolute trash-tier dream, grounding himself with a quick reality check. He is actually Archimond, the one and only devil of the continent. Flashing back 200 years, he lost himself to pure rage and nearly tore the world apart, only to get permanently shut down by the blade of the northern knight, Burkle Rhineland. As his past self faded into darkness, the universe prepared the ultimate troll move of reincarnating him as that very bastard's descendant, snapping back to the present. Tugging at his messy silver hair, our hero admits he still can't quite get used to this new skin, even with his past life memories fully intact. The inner monologue gets cut short when a towering silhouette in the doorway casually notes that Klein talks way too much in his sleep. Enter Priest Garrison, a scarred fanatic who has spent years treating this guy like a literal demon under the totally accurate suspicion that he's Archimond. Klein tries to play dumb and blame his rambling on low stamina, but before he can spin a better excuse, the red-haired maid Erin suddenly tackles him in a massive hug from behind. The pint-sized maid proudly announces she heard every single word of his midnight monologue. She hits him with a full theatrical reenactment, screaming about destroying the continent and commanding armies as Archimond, while the priest just stares daggers into the back of Klein's head. The absolute peak of awkward timing is achieved when Butler Veerman knocks to announce a swordsmanship demonstration, giving Garrison the perfect opening to thank Erin for her stellar intelligence gathering. Radiating enough holy fury to power a small city, the fanatic decides our boy's daily purification rituals are officially getting doubled. Klein just clamps a hand over the little snitch's mouth, groaning as his morning goes from bad to worse. Cut to the grand exterior of the Rhineland estate, where my guy is internally raging at the absolute audacity of that crazy clergyman. Striding down the halls, he tries to pivot his brain to the sudden invite to a swordsmanship demo. Veerman casually drops the bomb that the Duke himself personally requested the young master's presence. While Klein tries to figure out why his estranged father would suddenly want him around, Erin completely ignores the tension to beg for a snack. The butler immediately starts scolding her for lacking manners, but our hero just sighs and rips the wrapper open for her anyway. She happily munches away on the cookie, completely unbothered by the withering glare of disapproval Veerman is shooting their way. Staring up at the estate's massive chandelier, Klein presses the old man for the real reason he's being dragged to this event. Veerman leans in to inform our guy that the extended branch family has arrived at the venue. Klein's eye narrows as he processes the annoying update. Sure enough, it takes about 2 seconds for a pack of arrogant nobles to spot him in the hallway. They immediately start running their mouths, sarcastically hailing him as the great Lord Archimond. His maternal cousins think they're hilarious, cracking jokes about his 7-year vacation rotting away in the monastery. Over in the corner, the gluttonous Northern Branch relatives are just here for the free food, double-fisting chicken legs. And then there are the Western cousins, flanking a striking blonde woman who sits in elegant judging silence. Our boy completely tunes out the peanut gallery, his mind already moving on. But when one of the blondes has the nerve to say someone like him doesn't belong in their Rhineland family, Klein finally snaps his head around. His dead-eyed glare instantly triggers the cousins, but our guy is just internally laughing at their audacity to claim the family name. He knows exactly why these distant nobodies are acting so bold. The main house is slowly falling apart. The sheer fact that these side character cousins feel comfortable disrespecting a direct descendant right to his face tells him everything he needs to know about the family's crumbling hierarchy. Down in the grand hall, that power dynamic is on full display as a fierce sparring match pops off. A purple-haired youth swings his wooden sword like a madman, cursing out his opponent Dellen with every heavy strike. Sweating bullets and absolutely mauling, the attacker screams at the blonde youth to stop holding back and fight for real. But Dellen is just playing on easy mode, effortlessly parrying every frantic swing before calmly telling Dalton that the match is already over. Flashing a confident, almost apologetic smile, the blonde preps his counterattack. This absolute unit is Dellen Rhineland, the eldest son, a prodigious genius, and our hero's older half-brother. Klein watches the spar from the sidelines, fully aware that this golden boy is the sole pillar keeping the family's prestigious swordsmanship reputation from completely tanking. Refusing to take the L, Dalton charges forward for one last desperate all-or-nothing strike. Our guy's eyes flare with a sinister purple light as he locks onto the technique, his mind hyper-analyzing the blade work for the very first time since his reincarnation. Dellen doesn't even break a sweat, smoothly sidestepping the heavy thrust like it's moving in slow motion. Then in a blinding flash of yellow aura, the prodigy closes the distance instantly, leaving Dalton completely stunned. Suddenly, a glowing, star-like pattern flares to life in our boy's pupil, downloading the entire sequence into his brain like he just unlocked a cheat code. His enhanced vision perfectly tracks the exact angle of the blonde prodigy's footwork, and the precise millisecond of every single push-off. Completely outclassed, Dalton swings his wooden sword wildly, sweating bullets as desperation takes the wheel. Our guy doesn't just see the physical movements. He perceives the raw flow of mana itself as the older brother winds up the Rhineland family's ultimate secret technique. With an explosive fiery upward slash, Delin unleashes the legendary meteor sword, completely disarming the purple-haired challenger and sending his weapon flying into the stratosphere. The match is officially called the second the wooden blade stops dead at Dalton's chest, cementing a flawless zero-diff victory. Flashing a smug little smirk, the victor casually reminds his opponent that he warned him this would end badly. The peanut gallery absolutely loses their minds, completely starstruck that the young heir actually pulled off such a high-level move in a live spar. Over on the sidelines, our hero rubs his eye to shake off the weird visual glitch, tuning into the crowd's whispers that this entire beatdown was just a political flex to keep the Branch families in check. Suddenly, a bright voice rings out across the ornate grand hall calling out his name. Dropping the intimidating aura instantly, Delin jogs over with a warm golden retriever smile, genuinely surprised to see his little brother in the audience. Rubbing the back of his neck, he jokes that he would have put on a better show if he knew Klein was watching, cementing his status as the absolute picture of a perfect, highly skilled older sibling. Our guy instantly changed the topic and asked if these extended relatives just showed up to leech off the main house's bank account again. But before he can finish his sentence, a deep, commanding voice cuts through the chatter to praise the Golden Boy's performance. Enter Heinkel Rhineland, the seventh head of the family and the man sitting at the very top of the food chain. Delin practically lights up, eagerly jogging over to greet the patriarch. The Duke gives his eldest son an approving nod, commending him for mastering the family's signature technique at such a young age. Watching the wholesome father-son bonding moment, our hero silently notes that Delin is basically the man's last remaining source of pride. One of the instructor knights immediately glazes Delin up, calling his mana control and precision completely overwhelming for his age bracket. The blonde prodigy plays the humble card, insisting he still has a long way to go, but Heinkel cuts the modesty short. The Duke drops a heavy lore quote, reminding everyone of the first Duke Berkel's dying words that a Rhineland knight must always be the absolute best in the Empire. Eating up the main character speech, Delin bows deeply and promises to engrave those words into his very soul. Then the room's temperature drops as Heinkel shifts his piercing gaze directly onto Klein. Caught totally off guard, bro just freezes up, a single bead of sweat dropping as he waits for the inevitable lecture. Heinkel slowly extends a heavy hand toward our boy, resting it right on his head before bluntly announcing to the entire room that he still can't feel a single drop of mana from him. Klein quietly apologizes, the crushing realization sinking in that without any potential, he's nothing but a worthless burden in his father's eyes. One of the instructors desperately tries to run damage control, blaming the kid's weakness on those lost years locked up in the monastery, but the awkward silence is absolutely deafening. It doesn't take long for the peanut gallery to start whispering, the nobles eagerly gossiping about the Manhwa's second son. The Branch family members absolutely eat this up, using the public humiliation as hard proof that the main bloodline is washed and it's time for them to take over. Our hero walks away completely unfazed by the personal strays he's catching, but absolutely seething over the disrespect shown to Berkel's legacy. He clenches his fists until his knuckles turn white, furious that his ancient nemesis sacrificed his own life to protect these pathetic, ungrateful vultures. As the crowd disperses to enjoy the rest of the event, our guy is left standing completely alone in the massive hallway. But the peace doesn't last long before a purple-haired youth slides up from behind, loudly mocking his total inability to swing a sword. The arrogant Branch relative sneers, calling him an absolute disgrace to the entire family name. Recognizing the punk as Dalton Cornwell, Klein doesn't even blink, calmly firing back by asking if fooling around with girls behind the ballroom is the family's true pride. Dalton completely loses his mind, screeching to know how his perfectly bought and paid for little secret got out. The purple-haired punk charges forward in a blind rage, but our guy casually sticks a single foot out to check his vibe. Dalton eats absolute dirt, face-planting into the hallway floor hard enough to rattle his ancestors. Sporting a fresh bloody nose, the fallen noble screams while Klein coldly turns his back, mocking the loser for trying to punch down just because he got utterly crushed by Delin earlier. Desperate for a hit, Dalton crosses the ultimate line, screeching that Klein is nothing but a bastard who doesn't even know his own mother. Our hero stops dead in his tracks, glancing back over his shoulder with a single eye glowing with pure unadulterated murder. Looking up from the floor, Dalton starts sweating bullets, suddenly realizing he just aggroed a raid boss without a healer. In his mind's eye, a faceless framed portrait flashes by. But Klein doesn't actually care about a mother he never knew. What truly pisses him off is this Branch family rat's blatant disrespect toward the direct bloodline. Dark, suffocating aura bleeds from his glowing pupil as he stares down at the pathetic display, genuinely wondering how the mighty Rhineland name sank this low. In his mind's eye, A swirling, abstract vision of his past life's executioner flares as the ultimate cosmic irony burns through him. Why has the family of the legendary hero who killed him become so utterly pathetic? Before our guy can turn this hallway into a literal crime scene, the escort knight Dunkel steps in, sharp and authoritative, ordering Dalton to stand down. The black-haired knight glares down at the kneeling youth, laying down the law and sternly warning that he absolutely will not tolerate any further disrespect toward the main house. Dalton grinds his teeth so hard they might crack, absolutely seething as he's forced to swallow his pride and comply. He storms off down the hall, spitting one last pathetic insult over his shoulder about how our hero should be thanking his lucky stars the knight intervened. Completely ignoring the retreating coward, Klein casually turns to Dunkel and asks if he happens to have a spare blade lying around. The comic cuts to a secluded misty forest clearing, the dead of night wrapping the estate in heavy shadows. The black-haired knight hands over a sheathed sword without a second thought. Still, Dunkel can't help but ask why the young master needs a weapon at this ungodly hour. My guy just takes a few experimental practice swings, casually trying to mimic the meteor sword technique Dellen showed off earlier. Deciding he needs some privacy for this little experiment, Klein dismisses his guard and tells him to head back inside. Dunkel watches him walk toward the clearing, his heart heavy with pity for a boy clinging to a dream he can never achieve. It's a harsh reality. Without a single drop of mana, becoming a knight is a pipe dream, let alone pulling off the Duke's personal, highly guarded secret technique. The guard knows full well that even if the kid perfectly copies the physical movements, the sword art is fundamentally impossible to execute. But as our boy stands alone in the howling wind and closes his eyes, the memory of Dellen's exact sword path burns strangely, perfectly clear in his mind. In his mind's eye, my guy breaks down the tape frame by frame. The exact footwork, the precise timing, the trajectory of the blade, and the complex flow of mana required to pull it off. Then, the impossible happens. A jagged spark of dark purple energy violently crackles to life right beside his eye. Down below, Dunkel whips around, completely blindsided as a hurricane-force gale suddenly erupts at his back. The knight stares in absolute disbelief at the suffocating pressure rolling off the supposedly manaless trash of the family. His eyes go wide with pure, unadulterated horror as the realization hits him. Our hero isn't just swinging a stick, he's actually charging up the Duke's signature move. With an ear-splitting roar, Klein detonates a colossal pillar of dark purple mana, completely obliterating the bedrock beneath his feet. Bro is fully enveloped in a blinding, catastrophic aura, his borrowed blade screaming with enough raw power to level a city block. Dunkel is left completely paralyzed, his jaw on the floor as he witnesses the sheer world-breaking scale of the eruption. As the swirling vortex of dust and energy finally begins to settle, the terrified escort knight stammers out a hesitant call to his young master. But our guy is just as shocked as his audience, staring at his own trembling hands, utterly flabbergasted that the impossible technique actually worked on the very first try. Erin stares off-screen, her jaw practically hitting the floor. Garrison is just as stunned, completely lost for words at the spectacle. And what's got them so shook? Just someone casually speedrunning a drowning simulator. Two servants are literally holding our boy Klein's head underwater in a bucket, and the kid has been chilling down there for over a solid minute. He finally rips himself free, gasping for air, while the priest jokes about upgrading his next purification ritual to a full-on fish tank. My guy is internally raging at the extended torture session, but Garrison just laughs it off, claiming he sensed some ominous vibes from his room today. Klein is absolutely fed up with this bogus excuse, though Erin is quick to slide in with a fresh towel. The daily harassment is cut short when Dunkel rolls up to deliver a sealed letter from Dalton Cornwell. Our hero dries his hair, completely baffled as to why the noble who just got publicly humiliated would be sending him mail. A quick mental flash of Dalton's unhinged rage tells Klein that this supposed apology is the biggest cap of the century. He turns the envelope over, his mind already working the angles. It turns out to be an invite to a hunting competition, and while Erin literally Tokyo drifts across the floor with a rag, this guy knows the whole setup screams trap. Our boy easily connects the dots, figuring Dalton just needed a flimsy excuse to lure him out of the estate. When Dunkel asks if he's actually going to walk into it, our hero just shrugs and decides to accept the RSVP. He shoots a side eye at a nearby practice sword, knowing he's got a massive ace up his sleeve for whatever ambush awaits. In his mind's eye, he replays the absolute beatdown Dellen handed Dalton a few days ago, analyzing every single frame of the clash. A massive realization clicks into place. His eyes possess a broken cheat skill that lets him perfectly copy any technique he sees even once. He visualizes himself executing the family's secret strike with flawless precision, completely clueless as to how he unlocked this literal copycat hack. Snapping back to reality, Dunkel moves to prep the transport only for Priest Garrison to suddenly crash the party. The scarred holy man volunteers to chaperone the trip, instantly triggering my guy's fight-or-flight response as he demands to know what kind of fresh hell the priest is plotting. But Garrison cuts off the young master's rant with a dead serious stare. The priest explains that his holy radar is going absolutely crazy, sensing some seriously dark vibes in the air today. Cut to the group hitting the road, their carriage rolling away from the massive white estate and into the dense woods. And judging by the violently bumpy dirt path, it's going to be a miserable, bone-rattling ride for everyone involved. Sure enough, the rough terrain has poor Erin fighting for her life as she violently loses her lunch on the carriage floor. Garrison tries to play the caring chaperone by offering up a pillow, while our boy just sighs, reminding the maid she really didn't have to tag along. Klein explains that the western forest is notoriously brutal on first-timers. He tells her to just lay her head down and she'll feel better in no time. But Garrison completely misreads the room, clutching the pillow to his chest with happy tears, until Klein brutally deadpans that the cushion is for the maid, calling the priest crazy for thinking otherwise. Ignoring the scarred man's dramatic sniffling, our hero turns his attention back to the window. Staring out at the lush, vibrant greenery, he notes just how drastically the landscape has transformed. A flashback hits him. 2 centuries ago, this exact spot was a frozen hellscape choked with snow and the rotting corpses of his enemies. Back in the present, the carriage finally rolls to a stop, and Dunkel pulls the heavy door open. The group steps out to take in the sprawling, obscenely massive Cornwall estate. As Erin continues to aggressively empty her stomach in the background, my guy takes a good look at Dalton's home turf. It doesn't take a genius to realize this Branch family's mansion is somehow way more lavish than the main house of a supposedly great duchy. A couple of snobby guests are already whispering about how much cash the Branch family is blowing on a simple kids hunting competition. But before our hero can do the math, a familiar voice calls his name. Enter Dalton Cornwell, strutting up with a pack of massive snarling hounds. The purple-haired brat wastes no time flexing, bragging that these high ceilings and thick walls were paid for with money squeezed straight from the main house. A drooling beast growls as Dalton mocks my guy's 7-year monastery lockdown, asking if he even knows how the real world works. Klein doesn't even blink at the disrespect, calmly noting the dogs are practically starving before asking when they're going to stop chatting and start hunting. Dalton just smirks, calling him an impatient bastard and claiming he prepared something special just for him. Without another word, he casually drops the leashes. He declares the start of the event, and the pack immediately bolts forward. The comic cuts to raw meat scattered across the mountain, as Dalton explains he's baited the entire area. He brags that a starving dog's sense of smell is 100,000 times sharper than a human's. Drawing back his bow with a sickening grin, Dalton lays out the real game, while the crazed beasts are distracted by the scent. He casually snipes one of the poor hounds right through the flank. It's an absolute slaughter as Dalton unloads arrow after arrow into the helpless pack. The absolute psycho celebrates his twisted target practice, howling with laughter over his so-called successful hunt. Dalton's sick victory lap is interrupted when Erin comes running in. Recognizing her as our boy's personal maid, the purple-haired menace drops a heavy, condescending hand on her head. Flashing a malicious smirk, he wonders aloud why a brat like her is kept around and threatens to give her some real work to do. But before he can cross that line, a hand clamps down on his wrist like a steel trap. Dalton snaps his head back in shock as a cold voice orders him to let go. It's our hero Klein, glaring absolute daggers and promising to snap the noble's arm like a twig if he doesn't back off. Scoffing at the threat, Dalton forcefully yanks his hand free. He aggressively shoves my guy backward, barking at him to stop acting so tough. Dalton brushes off the brutal hit, hops on his horse and excitedly shouts for Klein to follow him into the woods. But before riding out, our hero orders Dunkel to hang back with Erin, completely ignoring the messenger's protests that it's too dangerous to go alone. To shut down the argument, my guy slips him a small parchment. It's a signal magic scroll, a one-time use item that instantly transmits a warning the second it's torn. Klein leans in, quietly explaining that Priest Garrison has been acting way too suspicious, and if the holy man suddenly vanishes, it means things have gone south. Flashing a crescent moon crest on the back of his hand, he tells Dunkel to rip the scroll immediately if that happens, which will send a direct alert right to him. With his contingency plan set, our boy spurs his horse and bolts off, leaving his panicked escort in the dust. Meanwhile, Garrison just sits there reading, watching the departure in eerie silence. The sun dips below the horizon, casting a heavy atmospheric chill over the landscape. Riding alone through the darkening field, Klein tracks his target toward the edge of a dense forest, figuring the noble couldn't have gotten far. Suddenly he pulls back on the reins as a grim sight catches his eye. Waiting for him in the tall grass is Dalton, crouching like an absolute psycho among a pile of slaughtered animals and licking the fresh blood off his blade as he asked what took so long. Our boy hops off his horse, demanding to know what kind of sick game this is. He stares at the absolute massacre of woodland creatures scattered across the grass. Dalton casually levels his blade at our hero, calling this the grand finale of their little hunting competition. Gripping his hilt with murderous intent, the purple-haired psycho declares that his final prey for the day is Klein himself. He lays out his whole unhinged villain monologue, promising to chop off my guy's head and toss it right at Dellen's feet. He goes on to absolutely trash the Rhineland name, calling the main house a powerless, empty shell of its former glory. With a smug snap of his fingers, Dalton summons a whole squad of armed goons out of the rolling fog. A pack of rough-looking mercenaries steps up to the plate, fully backing the Branch family's hostile takeover of the dukedom. The hired thugs draw back their bowstrings, locking their sights on the young master as Dalton curses the bloodline he was born into. The traitor is already writing tomorrow's headlines in his head, gloating about the juicy gossip that's about to hit the noble society. He cackles that the fallen sword family of the north will be a total laughingstock once word gets out that their young master died like literal dog food. But as those last insults land, something dark and incredibly dangerous shifts behind our hero's eyes. Instead of cowering, our boy just lets out a quiet snort, which instantly escalates into a full-blown, unhinged villain laugh that echoes through the dark woods. Dalton stares at him like he's glitching out, demanding to know if the kid's brain has finally short-circuited. But as Klein lowers his hand, the amusement completely evaporates. The terrifying shadow of Archimonde bleeds through his modern vessel, his glowing red eye locking onto the arrogant Branch punk. A primal icy dread suddenly spikes down Dalton's spine. Our guy snarls that this family's legacy was built on the literal cost of his past life, and he refuses to let some third-rate extras drag it through the mud. And with that, the forest erupts as our hero unleashes a swirling boss-level tempest of pure energy. The purple-haired traitor stammers in disbelief, asking how a monoless dud is casting magic. But Klein coldly corrects him. He declares that this isn't magic at all, it's magi. The sheer atmospheric pressure of his dark arts forces the mercenary captain and his thugs to brace against the gale force winds. And as the blue-haired knight processes that highly taboo word, the true pants-wetting horror of who they just ambushed finally clicks. A sinister blue light washes over our boy's face as he flashes a confident smile and begins a forbidden incantation. Our guy asserts his absolute dominance over the spirits of the past. The dark aura instantly materializes into a swarm of terrifying, jagged-toothed skulls, all echoing a singular ravenous desire to feed. Dalton sweats bullets, his mind completely shattering as the impossible reality stares him right in the face. Standing dead center in a screeching horde of undead ghouls, our hero listens as the terrified ambushers finally scream out that legendary name, Archimonde. Flashing a ruthless, glowing-eyed smirk, the reincarnated devil points a finger forward and orders his new army to leave absolutely no survivors. He remembers it clearly. Right before the absolute slaughter kicks off in the present, our boy's mind flashes back to a hardcore, blood-soaked vision of his past life from 2 centuries ago. In those days he walked through oceans of bone as Archimonde, the feared devil of the continent. He thought the haunting sensation of endless death had finally faded from his memory. But in his mind's eye, the voices of the damned never stopped reaching up from the abyss, extending a mental hand into the darkest recesses of his soul. Grasping the shadowy tendrils, he fully embraced the nostalgic, intoxicating resonance of his past life's power. Back in the present, the attackers are sweating bullets, terrified that the legendary Archimonde is actually standing right in front of them. The mist thickens around our hero as his undead horde fully materializes from the shadows. Jagged-toothed skulls hiss into the night air, their orange eyes glowing with pure malice. Dalton just stands there in dead silence, waiting for them to make a move. But suddenly, the tension shatters as the Dalton and mercenaries burst into arrogant laughter, pointing at the skeleton summons and calling them pathetic boneheads. Our guy's eyes narrow in the shadows as he quietly repeats their fatal insult. Dalton openly scoffs, boasting that he's farmed hundreds of generic skeleton mobs on basic fetch quests. The rest of the ambush squad joins in on the clowning, treating the legendary undead army like an absolute joke and calling dibs on the bones for souvenirs. Brimming with unearned confidence, Dalton orders his men to clear out the low-level trash blocking their path. The ranged units step up to the plate, locking their heavy crossbows dead onto our hero. Dalton barks the order, and the mercenaries instantly pull their triggers. A massive deadly swarm of iron bolts completely darkens the night sky. The lethal projectiles rain down, but Klein doesn't even flinch. The entire volley violently impacts the earth, kicking up a massive blinding cloud of dust and debris. Dalton laughs like a maniac, fully assuming he just turned his target into a bloody pincushion. But as the smoke begins to clear, the commander's smug grin instantly drops. Those heavy bolts didn't pierce flesh at all. They just embedded harmlessly into thick, dark shield. The dust fully settles to reveal our boy standing completely untouched, casually chilling behind an absolute fortress of massive shielded skeletons. Flashing a cocky smirk, Klein notes that 2 centuries is apparently long enough for the world to completely forget what true terror actually looks like. The attackers immediately lose their minds, screaming in panic as they realize this skeletal vanguard just materialized heavy shields completely out of thin air. Our boy just casually shrugs off their panic, admitting that if these were standard-issue boneheads, their trash talk might actually hold some weight. But flashing a wicked smirk, my guy makes one thing crystal clear. His summons are simply built different. Tossing a mental taunt to his ancestor Burkle, our hero orders the undead phalanx to drop their shields and switch to full offense. Klein makes a ruthless vow to slaughter the very people who dare to mock the northern lands his ancestor died to protect. He clenches his fist and drops a single, chilling command. Charge. The undead horde explodes forward, closing the gap with terrifying, unnatural speed. Dalton reels back in absolute shock, his brain completely short-circuiting at the sight. The attackers scream in sheer panic, completely unable to comprehend how these walking piles of bone are closing the gap at a full, terrifying sprint. They don't just hack and slash, they systematically dismantle the ambush squad. Screams of agony replace the arrogant laughter from just moments ago. The undead army ruthlessly carves through the mercenary ranks, turning the supposed ambush into a completely one-sided slaughter. Dalton watches in pure horror as his hired muscle gets butchered right in front of him. While the blue-haired commander screams desperate orders to hold the line, our boy calmly deploys his next tactical unit. The surviving attackers look up in absolute terror as skeleton archers take the high ground in the trees above. The undead snipers lock onto their targets, their glowing yellow eyes tracking every movement. Realizing they're entirely boxed in, the human soldiers break formation and scramble for their lives. With a cold detached glare, my guy issues a single word: fire. A merciless hail of bone arrows rains down on the fleeing cowards, ripping through armor and flesh. Dozens of men are pinned to the dirt, screaming in absolute agony. The infantry skeletons move in to clean up the mess, brutally stabbing the wounded right where they lie. Paralyzed by fear, the realization finally claws at Dalton. These aren't just some standard low-level trash mobs. Knowing they'll be completely wiped out if they stay at range, the commander frantically orders his remaining men to drop their crossbows and rush in for close-quarters combat. The commander is losing his mind, screaming at his panicking troops to hold the line. Gripping his sword with desperate rage, he steps up to handle things himself. Putting his entire back into it, he swings with all his might at an approaching skeleton. The blade connects cleanly, severing the undead monster's head right off its shoulders. Dalton actually rejoices, convinced he's just exposed their fatal weakness. But his victory lap is cut short when the headless body immediately swings its sword right back at him. He barely dodges the strike, his mind breaking as he realizes decapitation means absolutely nothing to these monsters. Our boy just smirks, reminding them that he already warned them about what they were dealing with. The headless skeleton casually strolls over to where its skull landed in the grass. It reaches down and scoops up its own severed head. With a sickening crunch, it just pops the skull right back onto its neck, dark magi sealing the wound instantly. The blue-haired leader watches in absolute soul-crushing horror as the impossible happens right in front of his eyes. These aren't your typical mindless beasts, they are a highly disciplined, immortal military force. The remaining mercenaries completely lose their minds, realizing they're up against an unkillable cheat code. Our boy stands like an absolute god of death in the center of his relentless advancing army. He casually notes that his current physical vessel limits him to summoning only 11 of these elite warriors. With a terrifyingly polite tone, he asks the trembling survivors if they'd like to continue. A final blood-curdling scream echoes into the dark night sky. Meanwhile, miles away at the peaceful Rhineland estate, Priest Garrison and the young maid Erin are cheerfully chatting by the courtyard fountain. The scarred man laughs heartily as he recounts stories of Klein's time at the monastery. He warmly teases Erin about how much she clearly adores the young master. She proudly puffs out her chest, declaring her absolute loyalty. But as her voiceover gushes about how wonderful our guy is, the comic cuts brutally back to the blood-soaked battlefield where a broken mercenary begs for his life. Erin's voiceover insists he's a total sweetheart, while the terrified merc scrambles through the pitch-black woods sobbing for his life. She calls him a gentle soul right as our boy ruthlessly carves a glowing blade straight down the fleeing man's back. She happily reminisces about him sharing his snacks, perfectly synced to a fatal, visceral spray of crimson painting the night. Completely oblivious to the absolute bloodbath, the young maid smiles brightly, crowning Klein the warmest person in the world. But the reality is a stone-cold executioner staring dead-eyed through a mist of his enemy's blood. The one-sided slaughter rolls on as the skeletal monsters carve through the last pathetic pockets of resistance. Dalton desperately parries a heavy strike, his stamina bar practically flashing red. In a blind fit of rage, the blue-haired commander wildly swings his sword, but the undead just keep coming. Every bone he shatters just knits itself right back together in seconds. Gritting his teeth, Dalton realizes that fighting these unkillable mobs is a massive waste of time. He locks his sights on the solitary, suited figure standing completely unbothered in the distance. Betting it all on a desperate aggro push, Dalton dashes forward, rapidly slashing a path straight through the regenerating horde to assassinate the summoner himself. Launching himself into the air, Dalton raises his blade for a desperate all-or-nothing strike against our guy. He screams at the top of his lungs, vowing to put this necromancer in the dirt permanently. His glowing sword descends like a guillotine, aiming right for the seemingly defenseless young master's neck. But in that split second, Klein's eye suddenly ignites with a brilliant star-shaped purple glow. Intense purple energy crackles around our hero as his hidden mimicry power boots up like a cheat code. Recalling the exact movements he witnessed earlier, he perfectly mirrors his older brother Dellen's wind-up. Dalton's eye practically bulges out of his skull as he recognizes the legendary secret art of the Rhineland family. With a devastating upward swing, Klein unleashes his own absolutely busted purple mana version of the meteor sword. The massive energy slash completely shatters the commander's weapon, tearing through his body in a brutal spray of crimson. Standing over his broken enemy with blood streaking his vision, Klein coldly promises that Dalton's true nightmare has only just begun. Standing victorious over his bleeding rival, our boy coldly acknowledges Dalton's earlier words. In a memory from 200 years ago, the legendary knight Burkle drove his glowing sword straight through Archimonde's chest, proving that if a necromancer is killed, their creations lose all power. Back in the present, dark magi flares around our hero's hand as he fully embraces the forbidden power of the devil of the continent. Gripping his blade, this guy finds it intensely ironic that the very swordsmanship used to execute him 2 centuries ago is exactly what's protecting him now. Our boy confirms that the blood of his enemy makes him strong. He cryptically adds that since he was born into this specific body, he can no longer turn away from his twisted destiny. Dalton's eyes blow wide in pure shock as his fading mind tries to process the bizarre statement. But before the defeated man can demand answers, he succumbs to his brutal wounds, leaving my guy to ominously promise his ancestor Burkle that he's next. With his first real W secured, the young master makes a hard vow to rebuild his declining family with his own 2 hands. Meanwhile, in a pitch-black void, a groggy voice groans out as a single eye flutters open. Dalton blinks into the suffocating darkness, completely disoriented and unable to see a single thing. The heavy clanking of iron echoes through the abyss as the horrifying realization hits him. His wrists and ankles are locked tight in thick metal shackles. The defeated man finally snaps fully awake, only to find himself strapped tight to a menacing spiked chair in a pitch-black room. He thrashes against the heavy iron, but his panic is cut short when a dark figure casually strolls out of the gloom to welcome him. The imposing man drops the ultimate lore bomb, introducing himself as Archimonde and revealing that this shadowy domain is an afterlife he personally custom-built for souls beyond the mortal coil. Dalton completely freezes up, the sheer, reality-breaking absurdity of sitting in the legendary Necromancer's VIP lounge washing over him. Archimonde start to repeat Dalton's sins while he was alive, the cruel youth starved and tortured innocent hounds, gleefully chasing down the poor creatures under the guise of hunting, while reveling in their pain with a sick sadistic smile. Dalton is furious and deep in the river of denial, screaming at the dark-haired man to stop spouting pure cap and unchain him. But right in the middle of his raging tantrum, a chilling realization suddenly hits him like a freight train. A brutal vision flashes behind his eyes. The agonizing exact moment our hero's purple mana sword effortlessly cleaved right through his chest, sending blood spurting everywhere. As the captive touches his intact torso in utter confusion, the necromancer bluntly confirms that he caught a fatal game over, and this realm exists solely to serve up his cruel karma. Absolute panic sets in as Dalton desperately begs to be let go, refusing to accept his grim new reality. Archimonde completely ignores the pathetic crying, casually summoning a crackling, ominous blue flame right into the palm of his hand. The shadows around the necromancer begin to writhe and growl as a pack of massive glowing-eyed hounds materializes from the dark. Dalton's face goes completely pale as the terrifying reality of his situation finally sets in. With a chorus of vicious barks and roars, the demonic beasts lunge forward, teeth bared and hungry. They swarm the helpless noble, tearing into him as Archimonde coldly declares this is the howling vengeance of every innocent life he snuffed out. Dalton shrieks in absolute terror, bracing for the unbearable pain as the fangs sink in. Archimonde's final judgment echoes through the pitch-black void. This realm is the very hell Dalton built for himself. Excruciating screams rip from Dalton's throat as his body is brutally mangled off-screen, paying the ultimate price for his cruelty. Through a blurry, tear-filled gaze, the broken man pathetically begs for a mercy that will never, ever come. Back in the mortal realm, a single tear hits the blood-soaked earth. Dalton's physical body lies motionless in the wind, weeping silently as his consciousness is shredded in the abyss. Our guy stands silently over the ruined noble, his black suit rustling in the cold night breeze. His expression is completely devoid of pity as he stares down at his handiwork with cold detachment. The heavy silence is broken by the bone-rattling chatter of his skeletal summons as they shamble up behind him. Raising a hand glowing with cyan magic, our boy acknowledges that they held up their end of the bargain and deserve a solid reward. With a quiet command, he shatters the curse binding their souls, granting them absolute freedom. The monstrous squad dissolves into beautiful cyan particles, leaving our hero standing alone in the dead of night. Staring out at the scattered corpses of the mercenaries, he contemplates the cruel irony of his resurrection, wondering why he was dragged back into the land of the living. His deep thoughts get completely derailed when a hooded figure steps out of the mist, casually dropping his name and noting how wild it is for young Master Klein to be out here wielding taboo necromancy. Our guy shoots a lethal glare over his shoulder, demanding the stranger's identity while sweating over exactly how much of that one-sided massacre just got witnessed. But the hooded necromancer just flashes a sinister smile, completely ignoring the question as raw cyan lightning starts crackling in his palm. Declaring that Klein won't live long enough to need a name, the stranger unleashes a massive blinding wave of magic straight across the blood-soaked clearing. The eerie energy snakes right over the dirt, sinking directly into the lifeless faces of the slaughtered mercenaries. Suddenly, a corpse's eye snaps wide open, glowing with a sickly, unnatural cyan light. The hooded figure chuckles like an absolute menace as the dead mercenaries stagger back to their feet, reborn as a horde of mindless zombies ready for round 2. Our boy's eyes narrow as he recognizes the highly taboo revival art, a forbidden technique used to puppet the dead. The realization hits him that this masked freak is a fellow necromancer, one who fully intends to recycle Dalton's failed ambush into his own personal army. The stranger's maniacal laughter echoes out across the freezing mountain range. Meanwhile, back at the brightly lit Rhineland estate, Miss Erin cheerfully tries to rope Sir Dunkel into listening to some embarrassing childhood stories about our hero. But the escort knight completely brushes the maid off, his entire focus locked onto the piece of paper in his hand. It's a signal magic scroll, and Dunkel is deeply troubled trying to figure out why the young master would secretly carry a high-level emergency artifact. Factoring in that Klein and Dalton have been out in the woods for over 3 hours with zero communication, the knight's gut is screaming that something is terribly wrong. Unable to sit on his hands for another second, he rushes out to the courtyard to mount his horse, only to be abruptly intercepted by 2 heavily armed guards. The men block his path and insist he stay at his post, using the ongoing hunting competition as an incredibly flimsy excuse to keep him grounded. Dunkel silently glares back over his shoulder, his suspicion instantly spiking to a 10. He spots the beast crest stamped right on their chest plates, immediately identifying these goons as Dalton's personal escorts. Realizing this whole outing was a coordinated trap, Dunkel fiercely flexes his title as the commander of the exclusive Night Order and gives them one final lethal warning to step aside. The veteran knight's glare practically bores a hole through their skulls as he asks if they understand the gravity of his threat. Dalton's goons swallow hard, completely folding under the sheer weight of his killing intent. With the interference handled, Dunkel turns back to Erin, instructing the maid to listen very carefully. He orders the pink-haired girl to head straight back to the safety of the mansion and stick right by the priest's side. Except Erin casually reveals that Garrison already dipped, marching off with a terrifyingly serious look on his face. Dunkel's eyes snap wide open as a prior instruction echoes in his head: if the holy man suddenly vanishes, tear the emergency scroll immediately. Spitting a curse under his breath, the knight vaults onto his horse. He bites down hard on the parchment and rips it right open, cementing the horrifying realization that this entire outing was a massive orchestrated setup. Signal sent, Dunkel spurs his mount into a full gallop, praying to whatever gods are listening that he isn't too late to save the young master. Meanwhile, back in the misty forest, our boy is officially caught in a raid boss encounter, completely surrounded by the hooded necromancer's rotting army. He grits his teeth, doing the math and realizing his magi tank is sitting on absolute zero after that flashy execution of Dalton. Smelling blood in the water, the cloaked figure points a finger and commands the undead horde to move in for the kill. The rotting horde shambles forward, groaning as they close the gap to finish the job. But instead of panicking, Klein just clenches his fist, mocking the enemy for thinking an empty mana tank makes him an easy target. Suddenly, the back of his hand begins to hum, flashing with the glowing crescent moon and star of his emergency signal mark. Flashing a cocky, menacing grin, our hero tells the masked bastard he's completely fucked. The hooded necromancer recoils in shock as the very air pressure around them violently shifts. Without warning, a blinding pillar of golden light crashes down from the heavens like a holy meteor. The explosive shockwave obliterates the front line of zombies as a massive muscular figure touches down right in front of Klein, smashing the earth with a glowing fist. His eyes burning with absolute divine authority, the scarred man begins a holy incantation. He unleashes a devastating beam of pure light, instantly granting the undead their final rest and blowing the entire horde to kingdom come. Standing tall like an impenetrable meat shield, the man tells young Master Klein to be at ease. The hooded enemy stammers in absolute disbelief, demanding to know who this glowing powerhouse is. Turning his scarred face to the side, Priest Garrison Veerman proudly declares himself a proxy of the Holy Order, ready to lay down his life for his young master. Once, long before any of this, the world trembled at the mention of the proxies. The absolute human weapons who executed the Pope's every command without question. Serving as the Holy Order's ultimate military trump card, these 3 juggernauts were the only ones blessed enough to wield the legendary holy artifacts of St. Gall. The lore stated that a single proxy packed enough raw, unadulterated destructive power to rival an entire, fully armed fortress. Back in the present, the masked hooded figure violently flinches, throwing an arm up to shield his eyes as a blinding flash of holy light overtakes the battlefield. The sheer kinetic force of the golden blast hits like a tactical nuke, scattering the remaining undead minions backward like weightless ragdolls. Sweating bullets in absolute terror, the masked necromancer stammers out a demand to know exactly who just crashed his party. Our boy Klein watches in utter awe as the dust settles, realizing he's staring at the very man who holds the title of the strongest martial proxy in existence. Flashing a supremely confident smile, Priest Garrison officially announces his arrival, stepping up to the plate to protect his young master. But the graveyard shift isn't quite over. A few stragglers somehow survive the holy orbital strike. Several bloodied zombie-like figures let out agonizing groans before aggressively charging straight at the priest and our hero. They roar like rabid beasts, baring their jagged fangs as they frantically close the distance. Without missing a single beat, Garrison steps into the pocket and absolutely caves the lead zombie's face in with a devastating glowing golden right hook. With a casual sweep of his arm, the priest unleashes a massive glowing golden arc that cleaves straight through the front line like a holy laser beam. His right eye flaring a menacing fiery orange, he commands the rotting sinners to hit their knees and beg. A beat later, the decapitated corpses hit the dirt in a synchronized fountain of gore. But the undead don't exactly have a self-preservation instinct, and another wave of mindless corpses just keeps on charging. Garrison simply plants his heavy boot into the earth with a ground-shaking stomp. He launches himself out of the crater with explosive blink-and-you-miss-it speed. Dashing straight through the horde, he turns their heads into red mist with a blinding sequence of rapid-fire skull-crushing strikes. Standing amidst the absolute carnage with his glowing golden scripture in hand, he officially declares this one-sided massacre to be both mercy and divine judgment. Watching from a nearby ridge, the masked hooded figure is absolutely paralyzed by the sheer absurdity of it all. He's finally realizing that the legendary broken power scaling of a Holy Order proxy is terrifyingly real. Knowing his entire build is completely outmatched, the masked villain abandons his post and immediately books it in the opposite direction. He curses his terrible RNG, sprinting for his life from the priest's ungodly monstrous strength. But mid-stride, the villain is abruptly halted by a massive hand, his mask flying off his face as his escape is instantly cancelled. Garrison materializes directly behind him, effortlessly lifting the terrified enemy off the ground by his head. The unmasked man screams in agonizing pain as the priest's glowing fingers clamp down, beginning to crush his skull. Cold and ruthless, Garrison ignores the desperate begging, telling his victim to be thankful for this holy execution. He delivers his final judgment, the ungodly pressure causing the man's eye to bulge and leak fluids. With a sickening crunch, the proxy completely obliterates the necromancer's head in a massive brutal spray of blood. A single severed eyeball bounces across the grassy blood-soaked battlefield. It rolls to a dead halt right at the tip of our hero's shoe. As Klein stares down at the macabre sight, an familiar voice suddenly calls out his name. Looking up at the man, walking through the misty field of corpses, the sheer physical pressure exuding from the priest's mere footsteps is absolutely overwhelming. Our guy's eyes widen in shock as he realizes this priest's aura alone is heavy enough to literally tear bodies apart. A dripping blood-soaked hand reaches out from the mist, aiming straight for our boy. The towering man casually mentions he caught the stench of necromancy and rushed over to crash the party. But a sinister grin spreads across his scarred face as he points out a massive discrepancy. He clamps that heavy gore-drenched hand firmly onto Klein's shoulder, locking him in place like a vice. Staring down at his captive, the man deduces that the dark taboo energy he tracked doesn't actually match the necromancer he killed right now. Sweat beads down our hero's face as he internally curses out this absolute unit of a threat. Our guy knows the stakes. One wrong twitch, and this scarred powerhouse is going to snap him like a twig. But before the executioner can make a move, a desperate shout shatters the standoff. Sir Dunkel comes galloping onto the scene, screaming out in a total panic for his young master. Klein turns his head in shock, barely able to process that his escort knight actually made it. But with the cavalry finally here, the adrenaline completely dumps, and a sickening wave of magical backlash hits him as blood starts pouring from his head and mouth. His frail mortal body just can't handle the strain of high-tier dark arts, and Klein drops to the dirt with a heavy thud, leaving Dunkel absolutely horrified. Sir Dunkel finally sprints onto the scene, rushing straight to our boy's side while the scarred proxy just stands back and watches the aftermath. Dropping to his knees to prop the kid up, the knight frantically demands to know what happened and why he's covered in so much blood. But then he drops the million-dollar question, asking where exactly Lord Dalton is. Staring blankly into the night, our hero delivers the cold, hard truth: he killed him. The comic cuts to a grand assembly hall, where ironclad justification echoes through the room. A hand violently slams onto a desk, echoing like a gunshot in pure outrage. Count Delcan Conwell, Dalton's father, is absolutely losing his mind, furiously rejecting the very idea that his precious son would ever attempt an assassination. He grandstands in front of the entire assembly, crying about his boy's honor and claiming it's a massive injustice to frame a dead man for such a heinous crime. But Duke Heinkel isn't having any of this soap opera, calmly stepping up and cutting the grieving father off with a single document in hand. The Duke flatly states that despite putting Klein through hours of grueling interrogation, the kid's story hasn't wavered for a single second. And to make matters worse for the Count, Heinkel drops the receipts. Hard evidence proving that Conwell's domain dispatched 20 private mercenaries right around the exact time the boys vanished. Suddenly sweating bullets, Count Conwell completely freezes up, internally cursing his idiot subordinates for leaving a massive paper trail right back to his doorstep. Desperate to spin the narrative, Count Conwell argues the math just isn't mathing. Dalton was a fully trained knight, while the young master has supposedly never even picked up a sword. The assembly members start whispering in agreement, pointing out that Duke Heinkel himself publicly confirmed the boy's absolute zero monopool just days ago. Sweating bullets, Conwell does the mental gymnastics, realizing that if he doesn't completely distance himself from his son's botched assassination attempt, his entire bloodline is cooked. So the noble pivots his strategy, deciding to drag our hero's reputation through the mud to cast doubt on the whole story. He loudly weaponizes the bizarre rumors surrounding Archduchess Claire, reminding the room of the kid's old childhood delusions about being the reincarnated devil of the continent. Heinkel isn't having any of it, angrily warning the Count to watch his mouth before he crosses a line he can't uncross. But Conwell doubles down, screaming out a wild new theory that the untalented Klein must have hired a shadow assassin to do the dirty work and is now framing poor innocent Dalton. Right as he hits his crescendo, a single authoritative word cuts through the shouting, freezing the purple-haired noble dead in his tracks. Our boy casually strolls down the assembly hall stairs, calmly noting that the Count really will spew any garbage to save his own skin. He lays out the cold, hard facts for the room. Dalton hired the mercenaries, he acted in pure self-defense, and Priest Garrison can personally vouch for the undead attack that followed. Backed into a corner, Conwell desperately tries to shout down the defense as a complete fabrication. But the young master just throws a look over his shoulder, flashing a sinister smile and one glowing pink eye as he mockingly asks if his claim of being Archimand is a lie too. As Count Conwell chokes on his own rage, our boy takes a moment to reflect on the blood-soaked vow he made over Dalton's corpse. His glowing eye narrows as he makes a silent promise to rebuild this fractured family from the ground up, and exterminate every last rat scurrying through its halls. He's just about to mentally map out his purge of the Branch family, when a heavy knock echoes through the chamber, putting a pin in his villain arc. The massive doors swing open, and a new arrival steps into the room, casually apologizing for the delay. Flanked by guards, the woman makes an absolute boss-level entrance, announcing herself as Laya, commander of the Blue Holy Spear Knights. Klein glances over his shoulder, recognizing her from the swordsmanship demonstration and immediately questioning what a high-ranking knight is doing at his trial. The assembly starts murmuring, demanding to know why an outsider is crashing their family drama, but Duke Heinkel shuts them down, stating he personally gave her the green light. The Duke explains that Dalton had previously taken on a mission under her command. Because of that connection, she's fully authorized to sit in on the hearing. Handing off her heavy coat to an attendant, Laya sweeps her intense crimson gaze across the room. Our guy immediately realizes those eyes are locked dead onto him as she raises a hand to address the room. And to everyone's absolute shock, the commander completely ignores the trial and politely demands a private one-on-one with our hero. Duke Heinkel officially grants the commander's request, provided she keeps the little chat brief. He waves his son forward, leaving our boy sweating bullets as he's suddenly put on the spot. The young master internally groans, absolutely fed up with how utterly unpredictable these high-ranking knights can be. But the gears quickly start turning in his head, and he realizes this is actually a golden opportunity. She's either trying to verify his claims, sniff out his secrets, or test his true strength. Giving his father a polite nod of obedience, my guy steps up and walks toward Lady Laya. He follows her right out of the assembly hall, hardening his resolve to face whatever she throws at him without taking a single step back. As the heavy doors click shut behind them, a sinister smirk crosses Klein's face. Because he's already plotting exactly how to play this elite knight like a total fiddle. Rewind to the recent past, where a fierce blonde warrior stood at the absolute peak of the continent's power. According to official records, a horde of towering, bloodthirsty beasts charged through the western forests looking for a slaughter. The massive monsters launched themselves at her back, axes raised to strike. But all it took was a single terrifying flash of a glowing blue eye. A devastating arc of pure energy instantly sliced through the mob. In the blink of an eye, the lone knight exterminated the entire high-ranking horde without needing a single backup troop. She didn't even break a sweat. A true testament to this absolute powerhouse's strength. Back in the present, Laya impatiently barks at our boy to hurry up. As our hero jogs to catch up, she coldly warns him not to act friendly, brutally reminding him that they aren't real family. He recalls Duke Heinkel explaining that Laya is his cousin through the Duke's second wife. But since she's the daughter of the first wife, our guy knows the harsh truth. They don't share a single drop of biological blood. Suddenly, the Knight Commander stops in her tracks, shifting the mood by mentioning she has a personal curiosity to satisfy. Before my guy can even blink, she violently snatches him by the collar. Leaning in way too close for comfort, she drops a completely unhinged question, asking if she can touch him. Out on the sunlit balcony, a heavily flustered Klein stammers out a confused demand for an explanation. But the Knight Commander totally ignores his panic, assertively grabbing his wrist without waiting for permission. She meticulously examines his palm, noting out loud that his skin is as soft and smooth as a baby's. While our boy internally freaks out over the sudden physical contact, she explains that even elite swordsmen who manage to avoid calluses will always leave behind hardened tendons from gripping a hilt, squeezing his hand to prove her point. Closing the distance until they're practically nose to nose, she delivers her icy verdict. His hands show absolutely zero trace of ever wielding a blade, making his supposed victory over Dalton a total impossibility. Unless, of course, he tapped into some other far darker power. A chilling vision of a red-eyed skeletal spirit flashing in her mind's eye as she voices the terrifying possibility. Feeling completely cornered, Klein violently shoves her back to create some breathing room. He glares defensively, mocking her wild accusations out loud, but internally, the realization claws at him. This woman is a massive threat. Our guy knows a trap when he sees one. That intense stare isn't just idle curiosity. She's deliberately limit-testing his poker face, knowing full well that even a split second of hesitation will be taken as a flat-out confession. Deciding to just lean into the skid, our hero flashes a cocky smirk and boldly asks what she'll do if he actually is the legendary Necromancer. But instead of triggering a boss fight aura, his grand bluff gets instantly derailed when Laya just bursts out laughing. She completely waves off the idea, looking down her nose to call him nothing but a delusional brat. The sheer disrespect hits my guy like a physical critical strike, freezing him dead in his tracks. His brain completely short-circuits at the absolute audacity of the insult. Trembling with pure indignation, Bro asks if she maybe misspoke, only for the Knight Commander to smugly double down. She ruthlessly dismantles his entire ego, firing off a combo of verbal daggers about how he's way too short, his proportions are terrible, and he has absolutely zero intimidating presence. As our boy visibly deflates in the background from the catastrophic emotional damage, Laya pivots to a spicy hypothetical. Glancing back over her shoulder, she promises that if a weakling like him can actually defeat a real knight, she'll reward him with a kiss. Left utterly speechless by the wild proposition, Klein just stands there staring blankly at her. The critical hit to his ego leaves our guy completely stunned, totally failing to process the provocative offer as anything other than a bizarre political trap. Brushing past the moment, Laya casually tells him to hurry up and follow her inside, leaving our hero standing in the hallway wildly overthinking her motives. But as she steps back inside, she pauses and gazes out over the sunset one last time. The playful demeanor completely vanishes as she shoots a melancholy glance over her shoulder, quietly muttering that the real Archimand would never act like that. Shifting gears, the two are formally announced as they step through the heavy doors of the grand hearing room. Striding into the lion's den, my guy takes a hard look at his own terrible reputation, fully aware he's still seen as the family's nuisance second son. With a track record like his, Bro knows absolutely no one in this room is going to buy his claim that killing Dalton was just a little light self-defense. Presiding over the tense assembly, Duke Heinkel kicks things off by asking what the two of them were just discussing outside. Rather than giving a polite answer, Klein suddenly whips a concealed sword straight out of its sheath. He violently slams the steel directly into the stone floor, sending a massive shockwave echoing through the chamber. The entire room gasps in absolute shock at the hyper-aggressive flex. Leveling the blade straight at a sweating Delcan Conwell, our boy decides to skip the diplomacy and prove his innocence the hard way. He tells the purple-haired noble they should stop dragging this out and settle things the old-fashioned northern way. Staring dead into the man's eyes, our hero officially invokes a trial by combat. The entire gallery erupts into absolute chaos at the mention of the ancient tradition. A vision of the brutal winner-takes-all bloodsport flashes in his mind's eye. A no-holds-barred clash where the last man standing dictates the absolute truth. Count Conwell stammers, completely thrown off by the sudden deathmatch proposal. But my guy doesn't let up, loudly calling out the Count for trying to frame him and dragging his mother's name through the mud. A portrait of his faceless mother drifts through his mind's eye. Internally, the reincarnated devil couldn't care less about the woman who birthed him in this second life, but her memory makes for a flawlessly dramatic excuse. Pressing the advantage, Klein corners the sweating noble and demands an immediate answer. With the surrounding aristocrats already murmuring in bloodthirsty anticipation, the pressure on Delcan hits a boiling point. Stepping in to seal the deal, Duke Heinkel formally sanctions the duel, declaring that the victor's word will become law. The gears in Delcan's head suddenly start turning as he realizes this ancient loophole renders all the damning evidence against him completely void. Spotting a golden ticket out of his execution, the Count turns back with a sly grin, smugly reminding our boy that he's publicly known to have zero mana. The purple-haired Count confidently announces he'll be subbing in a proxy knight for the actual fighting, secretly plotting to have this arrogant brat permanently deleted from the server. But our guy doesn't even blink, coldly promising to butcher whoever steps into the ring exactly like he did Dalton. Taking the bait hook, line and sinker, Dalton locks in the deathmatch for 4 days from now, completely oblivious to the fact that Klein is already playing 4D chess. Under Laya's watchful eye, our hero internally reveals his true masterclass strategy, using this highly public bloodbath as a stepping stone to completely crush the rebellious branch families. It's step one in his grand overarching ambition to rip the declining Rhineland house down to the studs and rebuild it from scratch. But naturally, Not everyone in the estate is thrilled about the supposedly monoless outcast volunteering for the meat grinder. Cutting back to his room, Klein's older brother Dylan is absolutely losing his mind, screaming at the kid for pulling such a wildly reckless stunt. The silver-haired teen just casually scratches his head and brushes off the very real threat of death, which only spikes his brother's blood pressure even higher. The blonde heir is left utterly flabbergasted when he finds out the Duke actually gave this suicidal madness the green light. Desperate to keep his little brother breathing, Dylan clenches his fists and fiercely offers to step into the arena as his champion. But my guy instantly shuts that noble sacrifice down, dropping a harsh reality check that the main family's entire grip on power rests solely on Dylan being the untouchable successor. If the Golden Boy steps into that ring, he's just handing the treacherous Branch families a perfectly legal loophole to assassinate the future Duke. Our boy calmly explains that he actually needs this deathmatch to salvage his absolute garbage reputation. As our boy officially rejects the assist, Dylan's mind drifts back to the very beginning. Rewind to approximately 15 years ago, where a young Dylan sprinted to the nursery, absolutely hyped to finally meet his new little brother. He peered over the crib at the tiny, fragile infant and thought he was looking at a literal angel. Back in the present, Dylan is practically bawling, begging his half-brother not to throw his life away in the arena after surviving 7 brutal years at the monastery. The blonde heir suddenly grabs our hero by the shoulders, completely startling him. Tears streaming down his face, he desperately demands that his little brother actually listen to reason for once. But the reincarnated Necromancer just stares back, completely blue-screened by this unexpected display of genuine unfiltered affection. Before Klein can even process the emotional overload, a black-haired servant bursts through the door. The guy apologizes for ruining the moment, but he brings urgent news. Count Conwell has officially locked in his champion. Without missing a beat, my guy casually brushes Dylan's hands off his shoulders and asks who he's going up against. The servant drops a massive bombshell. The champion is Randall, a legendary but excommunicated knight from the Empire. Meanwhile, the comic cuts away to the creaking wooden doors of a grimy middle-of-nowhere tavern. The Empire exiled the warrior for one terrifying reason: an uncontrollable animalistic bloodlust. Red liquor spills into a wooden mug, highlighting the gritty aftermath of his latest rampage. Broken, bleeding men groan across the floorboards while a massive, heavily scarred brute sits casually at the bar. Randall aggressively chugs his ale, completely unfazed by the absolute bloodbath he just created. Hearing that his next opponent is the young master of Rhinelands, a sadistic grin stretches across his scarred face, already eager to hear a little boy scream. A freshly forged, custom-engraved blade is finally ready for its master. The Dunkel hands it over to Klein, but makes sure to drop a massive disclaimer with the delivery. He warns that the absolute second this steel clashes with a mana-infused weapon, it's going to shatter like cheap glass. But for our boy, that fatal design flaw is exactly what he ordered, and he immediately heads out to put it to the test. Cutting to the arena, our hero steps out into the howling wind looking like an absolute boss. The spectators completely lose their minds, absolutely gobsmacked that the notoriously monoless kid actually had the guts to show his face. Up in the VIP box, Count Conwell is already gloating like he's won the lottery. He mercilessly mocks Duke Heinkel, bragging that his hand-picked Imperial Knight is going to completely mop the floor with the kid. The Duke doesn't even dignify the trash talk with a response, sitting in dead silence as he watches his son down below. Meanwhile, my guy is just casually looking around the empty dirt pit. He wonders what's taking his opponent so long to clock in for his own beatdown. Suddenly, a towering, ominous shadow completely eclipses him from behind. The hulking brute finally drops into the server, bringing a weapon roughly the size of a redwood tree with him. Randall, Conwell's excommunicated champion, glares down at his prey to confirm the young master's identity. The scarred giant sneers at the matchup, openly mocking how small and fragile his opponent looks up close. Reaching out a hand the size of a dinner plate, the brute promises to make our boy's neck snap like a dry twig. But before the giant can even blink, my guy completely vanishes from his hitbox, sliding backward with unnatural speed. Up in the cheap seats, the spectators gasp, completely baffled by the sheer frame data of that footwork. Of course, the arrogant nobles just laugh it off, assuming the kid is already running in terror before the bell even rings. Randall smirks right back, absolutely loving the smell of fear. But our hero isn't shaking in his boots. He's just annoyed that he actually flinched. A phantom hand flashes through his mind as he realizes that sudden reach triggered a pure trauma reflex from Priest Garrison's endless water torture sessions. He curses the holy man in his head, completely unaware of the VIP eyes watching him from the high ground. Perched on the balcony, Captain Laya observes the unfolding match in total calculating silence. Her subordinate begs her to dip before they catch heat from the higher-ups, but the captain brushes him off without a second thought. She's way too invested in this matchup, silently promising to reward our boy with a kiss if he actually pulls off a win. Back in the ring, my guy decides this deathmatch is the perfect sandbox to test out his new limits. He awkwardly rubs his neck, trying to play off that PTSD flinch with a lame excuse about sleeping funny. But the excommunicated knight couldn't care less about his posture, lunging in to grab his shoulder all over again. Our hero shoots him a death glare, his voice dripping with absolute venom as he tells the muscle-bound freak to keep his hands to himself. He goes straight for the emotional critical hit, mocking the giant for being nothing but a rabid dog abandoned by the Empire. That strikes a raw nerve and the scarred brute goes dead silent. With a blood-curdling roar, Randall brings down a sledgehammer fist meant to turn Klein's skull into a fine paste. Instead of panicking, the silver-haired teen just calmly flicks open a single button on his jacket. The giant's punch connects with the force of a literal meteor, instantly obliterating the stone floor. A blinding shockwave of dust and debris swallows the arena whole, leaving a massive crater where our hero just stood. But as the dust clears, Randall looks down in sheer confusion. His massive fist is clutching absolutely nothing but an empty black suit jacket. Up in the stands, the spectators start losing their minds, assuming our boy just got vaporized into red mist. Except, there isn't a single drop of blood in the shattered crater. Suddenly, a soft thud echoes through the lingering smoke. Our guy stands perfectly unharmed on the edge of the arena, his sword finally drawn. He lets out a slow breath, doing the math and realizing a head-on clash with this absolute unit is straight-up suicide. Randall tosses the ruined jacket aside as our hero accepts a grim reality. If even one of those sledgehammer fists connects, it's game over. The audience murmurs in dread, convinced that dodging is just delaying the inevitable against a beast with stats like that. Dylan watches from the balcony with a heavy heart, absolutely terrified for his little brother's life. In a flashback to shortly before the trial, Dylan remembers begging to take his place, but Klein firmly refused, insisting he had to fight to protect the true Rhineland heir from illegal assassination. Back in the present, another deafening crash shakes the arena, snapping the older brother back to the terrifying reality. Randall unleashes a devastating wide-arcing slash that threatens to cleave the very air in two. But our boy effortlessly ducks under the swing, his own fragile blade humming with a faint purple aura. Without missing a beat, he aims a lethal counterstrike straight for the brute's throat. The excommunicated knight, however, is terrifyingly fast for a man his size, leaping backward onto the arena wall to evade the blow. Klein immediately slides backward, his boots tearing up a long trail of dirt and sparks to reset the distance. Refusing to let up, the giant launches himself forward with a crushing, glowing downward punch. Our hero is forced to cross his blade and block, the sheer force of the impact sending shockwaves rattling up his arms. Grinning like an absolute demon, Randall starts running his mouth. He practically begs to see the kid's dark magic, directly calling him out by his true name, Archimand. Suddenly, the massive fighter's eyes widen in sheer confusion. Because my guy just lets out a soft, chilling sigh. A sinister purple star flares in his eye, as the reincarnated Necromancer genuinely considers just dropping the disguise and slaughtering every single person in this arena. A cold sweat instantly breaks out across Randall's scarred face. Without even thinking, the giant violently throws himself backward to put some desperate distance between them. The spectators are completely lost, wondering why the hulking brute just abruptly ran away from a stationary target. But Randall is trembling, his survival instinct screaming at him that he just narrowly avoided death. Because for a split second, his mind's eye saw the terrifying shadow of the Grim Reaper looming right behind the boy. The oblivious nobles in the stands just scoff, assuming the fighter is simply playing with his food. But our hero just lowers his blade, casually promising that he won't be using any dark magic today. Instead, he proudly declares that he is a Rhineland, and he's going to win this trial using nothing but a sword. Those defiant words hit Dylan right in the chest. And just like that, the entire arena erupts into deafening cheers for the brave young master. Delcan Conwell is utterly bewildered by the sudden shift in the audience's favor. Watching the shifting tide, the VIP gallery started cheering for our boy, while Randall just give a slight treatment. Randall tightens his grip on his hilt, his bruised ego desperately trying to rationalize the cold sweat on his neck. He cranks his mana output to the absolute max, a violent red aura exploding from his massive frame. Pushing his muscles and blood vessels past their breaking point, he prepares to crush this arrogant brat. Launching himself high into the air, the brute descends on our hero like a crimson meteor. Bellowing for the Rhineland boy to die, he puts every ounce of his monstrous strength into a single devastating plunge. But our guy just casually leaps backward, letting the shockwave of red energy obliterate the stone right where he was standing. That signature purple eye flares to life, its starlight pupil perfectly dissecting the flow of his opponent's technique. Randall presses the assault like a rabid beast, swinging his heavy blade in a blind fury. Yet Klein weaves through the frantic flurry of slashes without breaking a sweat, leaving literal afterimages in his wake. Sick of swatting at a ghost, Massive Knight roars in pure frustration. He winds up for one final, desperate swing, pouring every last drop of his aura into a world-ending downward cleave. The attack crashes down with catastrophic force, detonating the arena floor in a massive explosion of crimson debris. As the thick cloud of dust begins to settle over the ruined arena, Randall peers into the massive crater he just carved out, fully expecting to find a flattened corpse. But his eyes widen in pure horror as the realization hits him. There's absolutely nothing there. High above him, our boy eclipses the sun, having perfectly read and evaded every single strike. Klein flashes a cocky smirk, casually pointing out that a body that massive leaves the back completely exposed. And with a blinding flash of purple light, he brings down the mimic meteor sword right across the giant's spine. Up in the stands, Dellen and the Duke gasp in shock, instantly recognizing the Rhineland family's ultimate technique. Randall howls in sheer agony, his brain short-circuiting as he tries to process how he just got completely styled on. Landing gracefully, my guy looks down at his broken opponent, his glowing eye practically mocking the knight's belief that he has no mana. The entire arena falls into a stunned, breathless silence, the crowd unable to process the impossible display of skill. And up in the VIP box, Captain Laya stares down, completely flushed and captivated by the absolute monster disguised as a boy. Few days back, the dark-haired aide points out that the Duke normally would have intervened by now. Heinkel sighs that he can't act on personal feelings, knowing that stepping forward would only drag the Rhineland family's prestige down even further. The aide argues that Klein is facing an Imperial Knight and has absolutely zero chance of winning. But Heinkel solemnly replies that our boy stepped up to defend his late mother's honor. Clenching his fists, the Duke laments his own powerlessness, crushed by the guilt of failing to save his son from the monastery all those years ago. Seeing his lord's despair, the aide gently steps in to interrupt. He confidently declares that young Master Klein is not typed to fight losing battles. Heinkel is completely stunned by the update. To understand the clash, a vision of an icy sword flashes on screen, explaining that the Rhineland family's northern swordsmanship was forged in brutal frozen fields to use the absolute minimum amount of mana. Imperial swordsmanship, on the other hand, is pictured as a predatory lion, viciously tearing into its prey to illustrate how it overwhelms an opponent by unleashing all its mana in one explosive burst. While the Rhineland style is built on absolute temperance, instead of brute force, it focuses on threading the needle, striking an opponent's weak points with the absolute bare minimum amount of juice. Back in the arena, Klein lays out the facts, explaining that this min-maxed efficiency is the true essence of his family's technique. And it's exactly how our boy, a guy who supposedly has a zero mana pool, can still wield it flawlessly. He flashes a cocky smirk, boldly declaring that his minimal power is more than enough to put a meathead like Randall in the dirt. The excommunicated knight grinds his teeth so hard they might crack, absolutely mauling at being treated like a scrub. With a deafening roar, Randall pops his ultimate, erupting in a massive explosive shockwave of blood-red mana. The spectators in the peanut gallery start sweating bullets, instantly recognizing the brute's signature technique. A towering red lion aura manifests behind the knight, a heavy crowd control skill designed to instantly paralyze its target with pure fear. But my guy just stares blankly at the light show, completely unfazed by the overwhelming flex. Taking the silence as an insult, Randall leaps high into the air, bringing his curved sword down toward our hero with earth-shattering force. Up in the stands, Dellen screams his lungs out, desperately warning his little brother to dodge. Klein raises his blade just in time, catching the apocalyptic downward strike in a shockwave that rattles the arena. Sparks violently erupt as the intense pressure grinds the steel to its absolute limit. In a flashback to a few days ago, the local Dunkel handed Klein this exact custom blade, warning him that it was intentionally forged with one fatal flaw. Back in the present, the trap is sprung, and our boy's weapon completely shatters under the crushing weight of Randall's mana. The excommunicated knight flashes a malicious grin, totally convinced he just disarmed a helpless kid. He follows through with his glowing red strike, sending my guy tumbling backward as the broken shards scatter across the dirt. But as he falls, a sinister smile creeps across Klein's face, his purple eye flaring with terrifying confidence. Tightening his grip on the jagged hilt, he watches dark liquid drip from the ruined metal as he prepares his real weapon. In a blinding flash of dark purple energy, our hero uses that broken hilt to brutally sever Randall's arm clean off his body. The severed limb, still stubbornly gripping its giant sword, hits the arena floor with a heavy, sickening thud. Duke Heinkel immediately steps in, his booming voice echoing out to officially call an end to the bloodbath. Up in the stands, the arrogant Branch family members can only watch in stunned, sweating silence as their entire worldview completely collapses. Watching the match, the dark-haired aide realizes that while the family's swordsmanship is mana-efficient, executing it this flawlessly requires the footwork of a seasoned master. The truth hits him like a truck. Our boy deliberately baited his own weapon into shattering, just to secure a point-blank opening. It was a perfect, ruthlessly calculated trap, and my guy stands over the wreckage as the undisputed victor. Down on the sand, the shock finally wears off, and Randall shrieks in absolute agony as a geyser of blood erupts from his stump. Medics frantically flood the arena, scrambling to pin down the thrashing brute before he bleeds out. They desperately pump him full of sleep and healing magic, while our hero just watches the triage with cold, clinical curiosity. He casually leans in and asks if the limb can be reattached. The stammering medics explain that the arm is permanently lost and he'll need a prosthetic, to which our boy nonchalantly asks if that is all. While Klein mentally critiques how little healing magic has advanced over the last 2 centuries, Duke Heinkel steps up beside him. The Duke gives him a hard look, questioning how a supposedly sheltered teenager can feel absolutely nothing while staring at a freshly amputated limb. It suddenly dawns on our boy that he's acting way too much like the ancient devil of the continent. He awkwardly scratches his head, genuinely wondering if it's too late to fake a panic attack to blend in with the normal kids. Meanwhile, Count Conwell is having an absolute meltdown in the stands, crying over the massive bag he just fumbled. Heinkel steps up to collect, demanding the sore loser honor the agreement, but the Count furiously refuses to pay the piper. The purple-haired noble screams that he's already lost his son and his top-tier knight, completely losing his grip on reality. But mid-tantrum, the man's head is violently severed right off his shoulders. Our hero's eye flashes a sinister purple as he coldly calls out his enemy's name. Conwell instantly drops to his knees, his brain completely short-circuiting from the sheer suffocating terror. Snapping out of the shock, he frantically pats himself down, totally bewildered to find his head is actually still attached to his body. As the Count clutches his throat in disbelief, realizing the decapitation was just pure killing intent, my guy stands over him to claim his prize. Leaning in like a true raid boss, Klein orders the broken man to confess his sins and kneel before the Master of the North. Bathed in a sinister purple glow, our boy commands him to bow his head and beg for mercy. He promises the Count that he will be crushed under the agonizing weight of his sins for all of eternity. In the Count's mind's eye, Klein's dark aura manifests as a massive spectral Grim Reaper looming over him, scythe raised and ready to collect. The noble's mind completely snaps, his teeth chattering uncontrollably as tears and snot stream down his face. He drops to his knees, pressing his forehead into the dirt in an act of total pathetic submission. As Conwell babbles out a full confession to plotting against our hero, the terrifying truth behind this aura is revealed. It's a dark art known as Dead Man's Voice. A soul-disturbing technique exclusive to necromancers. The spell is designed to induce extreme mind-breaking terror in the living. Bleeding from the mouth and crying hysterically, the broken man begs forgiveness for ever insulting Klein's mother. Up in the stands, the spectators are absolutely floored, unable to process how a mighty pillar of the Branch family just crumbled into a weeping mess. With his enemies thoroughly crushed, my guy raises his shattered blade to the sky. Commanding the crowd's undivided attention, he prepares to make a formal declaration that will finally put respect on his house's name. Voice booming across the arena, he proudly proclaims himself the rightful victor of the trial by combat. He claims his bloodline as the son of the Grand Duchess and the second son of the North's strongest knight, Heinkel Rhineland. Standing tall before the stunned nobility, our boy triumphantly shouts his name for all to hear, Klein Rhineland. Meanwhile, far from the arena, heavy doors creak open. Inside a dimly lit church, the elder prays fervently, acknowledging the perilous path he has chosen. He begs the God of Light to watch over their dark intent. Heavy footsteps echo across the tiled floor, steadily approaching the praying elder. Priest Garrison steps into the light and Maroc greets him. Playing dumb, the cardinal brings up their surveillance target, claiming he needs to verify the details of the recent Necromancer attack. But the priest casually cuts him off, stating there's no need to worry, because the attack was all part of the plan. The priest explains how the hooded Necromancer was secretly dispatched in cooperation with the Empire. He lays out the twisted goal: use the terrifying undead to incite panic, driving the terrified masses straight back into the arms of the Holy Order. Caught red-handed, Maroc drops the act and tries to justify his petty political game, claiming a handful of sacrifices is worth reviving the church. Suddenly, a massive hand clamps around the cardinal's throat, violently cutting off his words. Garrison glares furiously, condemning the so-called servant of the Holy Temple for daring to make deals with heretics. The panicked elder thrashes wildly, choking and sputtering as the scarred man hoists him into the air by his throat. Without a single hesitation, Garrison brutally crushes the cardinal's head like a ripe melon, silencing his heresy in an explosion of gore. As the headless corpse drops heavily to the stone floor, a smooth voice casually asks the executioner if he feels any better. A newcomer in a pristine white coat steps through the carnage, dryly noting that Garrison has officially slaughtered more clergymen than actual necromancers. This unfazed arrival is none other than Archbishop Palamon L., a top-ranking official of the Holy Order. Garrison glares over his shoulder, fiercely demanding to know if the Archbishop orchestrated this entire twisted scheme. Palamon L. brushes off the accusation, claiming he merely authorized the operation, but adds that he's brought a crucial piece of intel. As the Archbishop brings up Garrison's current surveillance target, the scarred priest casually tosses the cardinal's crushed head aside and launches the attack at the Archbishop. But Palamon vanishes into thin air while Garrison's fist just kicks the air. Appearing right behind the Garrison, Archbishop calmly explains that whenever necromancy is cast, it inevitably leaves a lingering trace. He holds up a cross-shaped vial filled with crimson liquid, recovered directly from the hooded necromancer Garrison executed in the forest. And here is the bombshell. The vial contains 2 completely distinct magical signatures. The Empire's standard corpse-raising arts, and a much older, far more terrifying technique that manipulates the soul itself. The scarred proxy glances back over his shoulder, completely caught off guard by the mention of an ancient soul art. Palamon L lays out the cold, hard math. The conflicting magical traces prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that a second necromancer was active at the ambush. In a flashback to Klein's childhood, Garrison remembers it clearly. A young Klein was warmly embraced by his older brother Dellen, looking every bit the innocent child. The Archbishop demands his full attention, declaring that Garrison's surveillance target, the second son of the Rhineland family, has been hiding a terrifying true identity this entire time. Garrison's eyes widen in absolute world-shattering shock as the final piece clicks into place. Klein Rhineland is a necromancer. Meanwhile, a few days later, far from the capital's holy intrigue, a heavy rain batters the entrance of a remote mountain cave. Deep inside, the rhythmic clink of a pickaxe echoes through the pitch-black tunnels. A lone miner is on that grind, tirelessly harvesting glowing crystals from the cavern walls. He pauses to wipe the sweat from his brow, totally oblivious to the massive shadowy claw looming right behind him like a horror movie villain. A sudden chill runs down his spine and he turns around, his eyes widening in absolute terror. Outside, a blood-curdling scream is instantly swallowed by the storm. The comic cuts back to the Rhineland estate, where Erin is having a crisis of her own. She holds up a grubby, stitched-together voodoo doll, horrified that her little crafting project has ended up looking exactly like our boy, though Klein ignores her, giggling to catch up on his reading at the desk. He remembers it clearly. Just a week ago, he styled on Randall with the family's technique and broke Count Conwell's mind to publicly announce his true power. Our guy expects to finally have some respect to his name, but the harsh reality is that his 15-year-old vessel is entirely out of stamina. Erin hits him with a pout, complaining that he's always playing by himself and totally ignoring her. Erin figures he's just killing time with some generic fantasy novel, oblivious to the real grind. But as our boy flips the page, he notes that while the cover might look like your average fiction, the inside is packed with his secret, highly illegal notes on anatomy, magic circuits, and hardcore necromancy. Taking a calm sip of tea, our guy calculates his current stats. Capping out at 11 skeleton summons just isn't going to cut it for a real war of attrition. And a war is exactly what he's prepping for, as the scarred visage of Priest Garrison flashes in his mind. A fanatic who would gladly exterminate him the second he sniffs out the truth. His plotting gets put on hold when he's summoned to Duke Heinkel's office, where the Duke holds up a grim report of monster sightings at a local mine. One look at the crude sketch of decaying figures, and our hero instantly clocks them as undead. Spotting the perfect opportunity to grind some real-world combat data, Klein immediately volunteers to handle the extermination. Heinkel hesitates, warning his son that this isn't a game and there have already been actual casualties. But this guy effortlessly brushes off the concern, secretly hyped to track down the rogue necromancer from the forest and hijack their undead for his own twisted experiments. Unfortunately, his dream of a solo leveling session gets instantly crushed when a cheerful Dunkel pops up, announcing that the Duke sent him along as an escort. Cut to later that night, where our boy sits by a campfire looking miserable about his ruined privacy, while the escort knight happily vibes under the starry sky. The escort knight cheerfully offers up a steaming skewer of meat, trying his best to be helpful. Smiling warmly, Dunkel volunteers to take over the rest of the camp chores. Our guy just stares at him in deadpan silence. Pointing to a smoking, utterly radioactive lump of charcoal on the ground, Klein bluntly informs him that doing nothing is the greatest help he can offer. Turns out the esteemed knight commander is useless when it comes to basic survival skills, leaving him awkwardly apologizing for his culinary war crimes. Heaving a heavy sigh, our hero takes over the cooking himself and tells Dunkel to just shut up and eat. Biting into his food, Klein reflects that spending over a decade running for his life from Allied night orders back in the day made him a pretty self-sufficient camper. The escort quietly watches the young master handle the wilderness with practiced, almost unnatural ease. Breaking the silence, the knight notes how incredibly different Klein is from other kids his age, bringing up his hidden sword talent and that ruthless killer instinct he showed in the arena. Flashing a casual smile, Dunkel drops a nuke of a joke, suggesting that Klein might actually be the reincarnation of Archimond. Our boy internally starts sweating bullets, realizing Dunkel just hit the bullseye blindfolded, but quickly deflects, warning him never to say that out loud in front of the priest. The knight laughs the tension away, casually mentioning how the ancient necromancer was a demon who turned millions of northerners into the undead. A history lesson that makes my guy visibly flinch. Suddenly, the campfire violently flares up as a massive spike of murderous aura ripples through the clearing. Dunkel looks around, oblivious, brushing the terrifying pressure off as just a sudden gust of wind. But when he turns back, our boy's face is shadowed, his entire vibe shifting into something utterly deadly. With his eye glowing a piercing yellow, Klein locks onto the knight and issues a terrifying command to never speak of that matter again. The escort knight shrinks back, totally taken off guard by the sudden, suffocating hostility radiating from his charge. Before he can even question it, a blood-curdling scream pierces the night, prompting Dunkel to instantly draw his blade. The panic echoes from a nearby settlement, where the terrified cries are rapidly multiplying. Down in the streets, defenseless villagers are running for their lives as a massive horde of decaying undead hunts them down. 3 of the glowing-eyed monsters spot the newcomers and instantly charge forward for a fresh meal. Stepping up to the plate, Dunkel unleashes a massive yellow energy slash that violently cuts through the front line and sends the corpses flying. He whips his head back in alarm, frantically calling out to check if his young master is safe. My guy doesn't need a babysitter, effortlessly slicing an attacking monster wide open with a crackling purple blade. Unfazed by the flying viscera, Klein calmly asks his escort knight why he's just standing there. Stepping up as the shot caller, our boy orders Dunkel to stop gawking and focus on saving the civilians. A severed zombie head hits the dirt with a sickening thud, confirming the immediate threat is neutralized. With the square finally cleared, Dunkel sheathes his sword and formally introduces his boss to the stunned crowd as the second young master of the Rhineland family. Getting straight down to business, the knight asks the locals how long these walking corpses have been crashing their neighborhood. Meanwhile, Klein runs a quick visual autopsy on the fallen mobs, confirming they were puppeteered by the exact same reanimation magic used by that hooded necromancer back in the forest. A terrified local stammers out the timeline, explaining that the nightmare started 2 months ago, right after the Count locked down the local mine and people started vanishing without a trace. But the real horror hits when the villager drops a massive bombshell, revealing that the undead horde they just slaughtered were actually the missing residents of their own town. Before that dark reality can fully set in, an enraged man lunges forward and violently grabs our hero by the shoulders. He violently shakes the young master, screaming in his face to confirm if he's really a Rhineland noble, forcing Dunkel to step in. As the knight forcibly peels the guy off, the man breaks down, sobbing that they begged the ruling family for backup for 2 agonizing months and got ghosted. The tragic gravity of the situation settles in as the grieving man points a trembling finger straight at the corpse Klein just sliced open. Tears stream down the man's face as the crushing truth spills out. The monster bleeding out on the dirt was his own father, a man who did nothing but break his back day and night in the mines. The grieving son wails in agony, screaming to the heavens about why they have to suffer like this. Our boy just stands there in silence, letting the heavy, suffocating accusation hang in the air. But then his eyes flash with a cold, menacing purple light as he tells the man to shut up, bluntly asking why any of this is his fault. The villager freezes, stunned by the sheer, chilling lack of empathy. Klein coldly reminds him that he wasn't the one who turned his father into a walking corpse, and if he really wants to vent his anger, he needs to point it at the right target. Dunkel tries to step in and de-escalate the tension, but my guy ignores him, summoning a swirling blue flame into the palm of his hand. To the knight's shock, the young master begins chanting an ancient incantation, commanding the innocent spirits who died in sorrow to listen to his voice. The eerie blue magic washes over the mangled corpses, making them violently twitch as Klein formally declares he will uphold their final will. His hand glows with intense, otherworldly energy as he orders the lingering souls to follow his guidance. Spectral flames ignite around the faces of the deceased, and then in a breathtaking display of magic, glowing blue spirit forms rise from the slaughtered bodies, ascending peacefully into the night sky as the survivors watch in awe. The ethereal figures hover before our boy, their voices echoing in a forgotten ancient tongue. He listens in silence as the dead deliver their final, desperate plea. With a solemn nod, Klein grants them a single word of understanding. The surviving villager and Dunkel is left speechless, but one of the men immediately recognizes the phenomenon as soul resonance. The man explains it's a legendary spell from 2 centuries ago, used during the Northern Plague to grant the dead their final rest. Tears stream down the villager's face as he looks up, spotting his father's face among the floating lights. Offering one last peaceful gaze, the old miner's form begins to gently scatter into the wind. Freed from their rotting prisons, the spirits dissolve into brilliant streaks of blue ascending into the heavens. Above them, the storm finally breaks, leaving only a quiet full moon to watch over the blood-stained town. A short while later, heavy boots crunch against the rough gravel of the mountain trail. Our hero and the escort knight leave the village behind, making a beeline straight for the restricted mine. Moments ago, the grieving son had pointed them up this exact path, guiding them toward the source of the nightmare. Trudging up the dark trail, Dunkel can't hold back his curiosity any longer, asking what exactly our guy was chatting about with those glowing ghosts. Klein hesitates for a split second, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. Keeping his voice level, he casually mentions that the spirits were simply thanking him for helping them pass on. But then his tone drops to sub-zero, adding that they also begged him to get revenge. Dunkel stops dead in his tracks, that heavy word echoing in his mind. He remembers it clearly. Earlier tonight by the campfire, tossing out a joke about the young master being Archimonde's reincarnation, only to be hit with a terrifying, dead-eyed warning that chilled his very soul. The memory fades and the puzzle pieces finally snap together as the knight draws his sword with a sharp metallic ring, our hero's calm face reflecting in the cold steel. Standing right behind my guy with his heavy blade ready to strike, the knight drops all the formal titles and demands to know who he really is. 8 years ago, the 7-year-old Klein first returns to the estate. The captain watches the young master, fully aware that this kid just spent 7 grueling years locked away in a monastery for supposedly being cursed. But what really unnerves Dunkel is our hero's pitch-black gaze, an abyss entirely too empty for a child. Dunkel's mind flashes back to the day a piercing scream shattered the peace, signaling the beginning of the dark omens. Horrified maids had discovered the first gruesome casualty, a dead cat dumped right in the estate's kitchen. Then the servants had found another corpse in the garden, and a third the very next day. By the time the macabre body count had reached 7, absolute panic had gripped the household. Vicious rumors had spread like wildfire among the staff, pinning the blame squarely on the cursed bloodline of the kid who supposedly called himself Archimand. Dunkel watches our guy simply sit on his bed and stare blankly out the window while the estate descends into utter paranoia. Watching from the doorway, Dunkel just can't bring himself to believe a literal child is capable of pulling off such dark magic. The knight's doubts hold strong, at least until the wind howls outside on one particularly eerie night. A sudden sharp creak snaps Dunkel to attention. Peeking out, he spots the young master sneaking down the dimly lit hallway with a lantern in hand. Outside, the wind whips through the trees, setting a seriously ominous vibe. Undeterred by the creepy atmosphere, our boy marches steadily into the pitch-black night. Determined to uncover the truth behind the dark rumors, Dunkel silently tails the kid from the shadows. A sudden crow's caw shatters the silence just as they reach their destination. The family cemetery. Crouched behind a tombstone, the knight's blood runs ice cold as sickening squelching noises echo from the boy's direction. Horrified by whatever twisted ritual he imagines the kid is performing, Dunkel hits his breaking point. Unable to hold back any longer, he shouts out as a bright flash of light cuts through the darkness. But as the light washes over the scene, the knight freezes. Our hero isn't mutilating anything, he's gently wrapping a pile of dead cats in clean cloth. Completely thrown off, Dunkel stammers out a question, only for the boy to calmly explain that he's giving the poor animals a proper funeral. Pointing to the lesions on the tiny bodies, our guy drops a flawless medical diagnosis, noting that it's a highly infectious disease fatal to animals. He explains that if left out in the open, scavengers would just dig the bodies up and spread the plague even further. Stunned by this unexpected compassion, Dunkel suggests they call in a servant so the kid doesn't ruin his hands doing the dirty work. But our hero just brushes him off, stating flatly that someone has to do it anyway. The sheer heavy maturity of that statement leaves the seasoned knight completely speechless. But that unnerving, adult-like wisdom from a 7-year-old pushes Dunkel right over the edge. He draws his sword, leveling the blade at the boy's back and demanding to know who he really is. Completely unfazed by the cold steel at his neck, my guy flips the script, asking if Dunkel remembers the first teaching of Berkal Rhineland. Breaking a sweat, the captain recites the famous quote, that a person is defined by their actions, not their roots. Klein nods, pointing out that this exact philosophy is the only reason a peasant like Dunkel rose to the rank of captain, and the only reason a half-blood like himself is still breathing. Staring down the man who has spent the most time with him since the monastery, our boy places his life entirely in the knight's hands. He dares Dunkel to strike him down right then and there if he truly believes he's the reincarnated Archimand. Dunkel slowly lowers his sword, stepping down from their tense standoff. The captain admits he still isn't entirely convinced, but chooses to hold his blade for now. Instead of drawing it out, he firmly declares that the only person he serves is the second young master of Rhineland, not some atrocious devil. Our boy accepts the sworn loyalty with a calm smirk, and the suffocating tension finally breaks. The duo ventures deeper into the pitch-black abandoned mine. The knight sparks a torch to pierce the heavy gloom. The flickering flames immediately reveal a cavern floor completely littered with human skulls. They carefully navigate the treacherous bone-crushing tracks leading further underground. Dunkel grimaces, pointing out the overwhelming putrid stench of rotting corpses filling the air. And our hero casually notes that some of those corpses are currently shambling right toward them. As 7 decaying undead step into the light, my guy's hands flare up with swirling blue magic. He chants a dark incantation, instantly summoning a squad of his elite, yellow-eyed skeletal warriors from the ether. Dunkel whips his head around, completely caught off guard by the sheer terrifying presence of the summons. With a single cold command, Klein sends his bony vanguard charging forward to tear the enemy apart. The skeletal warriors launch themselves forward, closing the distance in a terrifying blur of motion. The mindless undead barely have a second to register the threat before the vanguard is right on top of them. In a flash of jagged steel, the summons violently slash through the front line, carving the zombies apart and splattering dark blood across the cavern walls. Dunkel is utterly baffled by the armored tactical appearance of these creatures, but our boy just shrugs off the knight's shock like it's nothing. Without breaking stride, the bony vanguard ruthlessly slashes down the rest of the decaying horde, turning the skirmish into an absolute slaughter. With the immediate area secured, the captain quickly urges my guy to keep moving deeper into the tunnels. But a massive guttural roar suddenly echoes from the darkness, stopping the knight dead in his tracks. A cold sweat breaks across Dunkel's face as he calculates the sheer volume of the noise, realizing they are about to be swarmed by at least 40 more monsters. Completely unbothered by the overwhelming odds, our hero simply extends his hand and lets a fresh surge of blue magic flare to life. He begins a chilling incantation, commanding the souls of the freshly slaughtered zombies to break their bindings and obey his absolute will. Dunkel watches in pure awe as the dark energy aggressively swirls over the battlefield, enveloping the mangled corpses. In a jaw-dropping display of necromantic dominance, the defeated enemies rise from the dirt, completely transformed into a fresh squad of glowing skeletal allies ready to hold the line. Klein flashes a cocky smirk, noting that this little necromancy trick should give them more than enough meat shields to push through. Right on cue, another blood-curdling roar violently shakes the cavern as the rest of the massive horde closes the distance. Our boy barks the order for the vanguard to charge, sprinting straight into the pitch-black abyss with Dunkel hot on his heels. The skeletal death squad rushes headlong into the darkness, completely fearless. A brilliant, crackling blue energy slash rips right through the front line of the approaching mob. Crashing into the enemy ranks, the summons brutally dismember the mindless zombies in a chaotic storm of close-quarters carnage. Refusing to let their momentum stall for even a second, the young master commands his rearguard to support the push. Unleashing a relentless flurry of magical sword strikes, the skeletal warriors slice the decaying opposition into absolute ribbons. The sheer ferocity completely overwhelms the horde, turning the narrow tunnel into a one-sided meat grinder. Dunkel watches the slaughter in pure disbelief. In the grand RPG tier list of the undead, skeletons are supposed to be absolute bottom-barrel trash. Yet my guy's summons are out here fighting with the hyper-coordinated precision of an elite military strike team. As the immediate violence finally subsides, thick black fluid and blood drip heavily from the wooden mine supports. The dust finally settles, leaving our hero and the captain standing untouched amidst a literal sea of shattered bones and defeated enemies. Still trying to process how they just wiped out a force 4 times their size, Dunkel snaps out of his daze as the young master reminds him that from here on out they are completely alone. Staring the knight down, our guide demands absolute unwavering trust. A promise to believe in him until the bitter end. With the vanguard cleared out, the duo presses forward, letting the flickering torchlight guide them deeper into the abandoned abyss. The quiet exploration is cut short when a sudden warm drop of fresh blood splatters directly onto Dunkel's cheek. He wipes the crimson from his face, his blood running cold as a faint, desperate voice echoes through the cavern. Startled by the sound of a survivor, the captain thrusts his torch high into the darkness and frantically calls out. However, the heavily bloodied man illuminated in the shadows doesn't want a rescue. He weakly begs for death. The shifting flames reveal a straight-up nightmare, dozens of mutilated victims suspended from ropes across the ceiling like meat in a slaughterhouse. While Dunkel recoils in horror at their agonizing pleas, our boy coldly deduces the grim reality. These are the missing villagers, kept barely alive to serve as living batteries for dark magic. Right on cue, heavy footsteps echo from the darkness as an unseen voice praises his spot-on analysis. A red-haired woman steps into the light, casually explaining that her reanimation spells require a massive supply of high-quality, living sacrifices. As she casually discusses the trade secrets of necromancy, our hero's eyes narrow as the pieces finally snap together. The red-haired woman pulls back her hood, flashing a knowing smirk that says she's got the upper hand. Greeting him like an old colleague, she drops the absolute bombshell that shatters his carefully crafted disguise. For the first time in this new life, someone addresses him by his true ancient title. The devil of the continent, Lord Archimond. The word necromancer originally paints a quiet picture, a mystic communing with the dead to seek ancient guidance. But that benign definition is long dead. During the Archimond incident 2 centuries ago, the devil of the continent unleashed an endless, unyielding undead horde. That continent-spanning slaughter only ended when the legendary hero Berkel Rhineland finally struck the Dark Master down. Since then, those who dabbled in the dark arts barely scratched the surface of true necromancy. They were reduced to second-rate magicians who merely puppeted brittle bones like cheap parlor tricks. Back in the present, the red-haired woman standing before Klein is built entirely different, boldly introducing herself as Pale. The wind howls through the desolate cavern as the tension instantly spikes. Dunkel is completely thrown by her casually dropping the name Archimond, but our boy's focus is locked elsewhere. Pale unleashes a suffocating, overwhelming wave of dark red mana. My guy immediately recognizes the high-level technique on display, noting she's actually infused her very robes with raw magic. Furious at the sheer disrespect, Dunkel draws his blade, fiercely warning the witch not to compare his young master to a legendary monster. Pale just giggles, playfully apologizing to the young master of Rhineland for stepping on his toes. But our boy drops the act, flat out confirming that he recognizes the unfamiliar magi radiating from her, and that she's a necromancer just like him. The red-haired woman leans in, her golden eyes narrowing as she spots a glaring contradiction in his setup. She points out that it's awfully strange for a fellow master of the dark arts to be packing steel. Having zero patience for this villainous banter, Dunkel cuts in, aggressively demanding to know what she did to the missing villagers. The witch completely ignores the knight, declaring that a true commander of death doesn't need to rely on crude physical tools. Instead, she opens her mouth, and a sickening stream of dark energy begins to pour out. The cavern instantly fills with the wails of the damned as her crimson aura violently expands. Agonized bloody faces manifest in the mist, screaming in eternal torment. Shadowy tendrils erupt from the void, thrashing around like they're hungry for the living. With a dramatic sweep of her arms, Pale unleashes a massive, terrifying swarm of tortured souls straight up into the cavern roof. Smiling like a proud artist unveiling her magnum opus, she offers to show this kid what true necromancy actually looks like. The red-haired necromancer gestures toward a swirling vortex of black and crimson magic. Without warning, a grotesque stitched hand bursts from the void with a sickening tear. Pale stands before the rupture in reality, proudly announcing the arrival of her life's ultimate masterpiece. A colossal amalgamation of flesh, screaming faces and tangled limbs slams heavily onto the cavern floor. Dunkel and our boy stare up at the towering abomination in absolute shock. The knight's eyes widen. He's survived brutal battlefields, but he's never faced a nightmare quite like this. It's a cyclops, a legendary monster stitched together from countless human sacrifices. Pale affectionately strokes the beast's giant weeping eye, cooing at the monstrosity like it's a newborn puppy. Then her voice drops to a deadpan whisper as she orders her pet to crush the intruders into a bloody pulp. The cyclops stomps its massive foot, shattering the solid stone beneath it. With a deafening roar, the towering mountain of flesh charges straight at the duo. Dunkel is completely caught off guard, sweating bullets as he realizes this hulking beast is terrifyingly fast. As the monstrosity swings a massive fist, Dunkel desperately grabs our boy to yank him to safety. But instead of retreating, Klein's hand firmly plants against the knight's chest. With a sudden shove, the supposedly monoless kid launches his protector completely out of the blast zone, leaving our hero to take the full devastating impact of the Cyclops' strike head-on. The cavern violently shakes as the monster's fist craters the solid rock, the sheer shockwave blasting Dunkel backward. When the dust finally clears, Klein is miraculously still alive, though his body trembles violently under the strain. Blood drips from his mouth, but his gaze remains deadlocked on the beast. Looming over the battered boy, the towering Cyclops gurgles in sick anticipation. It raises its massive foot, ready to flatten him into a red smear once and for all. A heavy shadow eclipses Klein as the lethal limb descends. But right before it can connect, a steel blade violently pierces straight through the monster's ankle. Dunkel anchors himself to the hilt, fiercely roaring that he won't let this freak lay a single finger on his lord. With a savage gravity-defying upward slash, the knight cleanly severs the beast's massive appendage right off its body. Even our boy is caught slightly off guard by his escort knight's sudden, explosive burst of power. Behind, Pale's eyes widen for a fraction of a second at the sheer physical feat. The fleshy abomination shrieks in agony as a geyser of black blood erupts from its stump, leaving Dunkel to stick a flawless superhero landing. But the knight's hard-earned victory lap is immediately cut short by the sound of slow, patronizing applause. The red-haired necromancer claps her hands together, dripping with sarcasm as she praises the swordsman's impressive little parlor trick. Because a sickening wet squelch suddenly echoes through the cavern as the monster's ruined stump begins to bubble and mutate. Dunkel can only watch in absolute horror as the massive limb completely regenerates itself in a matter of seconds, basically hitting the undo button on his ultimate attack. Fully healed and furious, the Cyclops roars and launches a devastating sweeping counterattack right at the captain. The knight grits his teeth, determined to repay the boy for throwing his monoless body into the line of fire to save him. Channeling that resolve, he leaps backward, narrowly dodging a crushing blow that completely shatters the bedrock where he just stood. Gripping his hilt tight enough to crack it, Dunkel feels a massive surge of guilt for ever daring to suspect that a kid this selfless could be the devil of the continent. He weaves through a flurry of devastating strikes, absolutely determined to atone for his misplaced doubts. Deflecting a massive claw, the swordsman vows to put his very life on the line to protect our guy. But frustration mounts as every single cut he lands instantly knits back together. Suddenly a bright flash of light blinds the beast. Seizing the opening, Dunkel vaults high into the air above the disoriented monster. Suspended in the cavern's gloom, he positions himself for a lethal strike, aiming directly for the creature's head. Pouring every ounce of his strength into the blade, the knight unleashes a fierce battle cry. His sword arcs downward, ready to cleave the abomination's skull right in two. Except the Cyclops is impossibly fast, swatting the captain out of the sky like a literal fly. A massive hand crushes Dunkel, slamming him downward with brutal bone-breaking force. The sheer impact triggers a massive shockwave that tears through the mine's bedrock. When the dust clears, the valiant knight is left completely embedded in the shattered stone, his body broken and bleeding out. Dust cascades from the cavern ceiling as the devastating shockwave finally settles. Dunkel slumps motionless in the rubble, completely out of the fight. Pale watches the one-sided slaughter unfold, practically shedding a tear over her own creation's sheer destructive power. She built her magnum opus on a mountain of gruesome experiments, stitching together endless corpses to reach the pinnacle of dark magic. This Cyclops stands as the ultimate culmination of her obsession, a mutated variant she believes no one else could ever replicate. Basking in the twisted glory of her success, the red-haired necromancer chalks it all up to her own innate untouchable genius. She throws her head back and cackles like a true supervillain, boldly declaring that not even the legendary Archimonde could build something this flawless. Her ego inflates to absolute delusion levels, utterly convinced she has surpassed the devil of the continent himself. But while she's busy monologuing, the fleshy behemoth reaches down and clamps its massive hand right onto the knight, griping and suspending him into the air. Ominous cracking echoes through the cave as the crushing grip threatens to snap his collarbone like a twig. Instead of panicking, our guy just casually steps forward, calmly diagnosing the monster's internal core connection point. Pale's manic grin instantly flatlines as Klein effortlessly deconstructs the exact core suture binding the corpses together and fueling its infinite HP glitch. Unbothered and completely unfazed, our hero casually explains that hacking away at the meat shield is a total waste of time. Wiping a stray trail of blood from his lip, his eyes flare with a sinister purple light as he asks the million-dollar question. He pictures the anatomy in his mind, noting that a Cyclops' core doesn't just sit still waiting to be hit. A mental diagram flashes before his eyes, showing the fiery weak point constantly wandering through the beast's internal pathways, flowing just like blood through veins. Pale just scoffs, her arrogant smirk returning as she mocks him for stating the obvious. That very mobility is exactly what makes her monster unkillable. Gesturing proudly, the red-haired necromancer reiterates that this invincible beast is her absolute magnum opus. Summoning a sickly pink aura to her hand, she sneers that his little textbook trivia means absolutely nothing in the face of true, raw talent. With a flick of her wrist, she orders the hulking amalgamation of flesh to step forward and crush the arrogant boy into paste. The giant beast roars, raising its massive clawed hand for a lethal strike, but my guy just stands his ground and scoffs at the word talent. He remembers it clearly. Back in his past life, Archimonde didn't just study these ugly things, he slaughtered thousands upon thousands of them. He never needed to calculate where their cores were hiding. The sheer instinct of tracking those rapid movements was burned directly into his very soul. Back in the present, Klein casually swings his blade, unleashing a blinding arc of purple energy that perfectly intercepts and slices right through the rapidly moving core. Pale's eyes practically bulge out of her skull as she registers the impossible. The blinding wave of energy shears straight through the towering abomination like a hot knife through butter. Our hero casually completes his swing as the so-called invincible masterpiece falls apart into a shower of severed flesh behind him. AMD, not only the monster but its caster head slices too. The hidden fiery core shatters into a million glowing pieces, instantly vaporizing the monster's regeneration. As the dust settles, the red-haired necromancer can only stammer in pure, unadulterated disbelief, her entire worldview completely shattered by a single strike. Klein just looks down at her with glowing blue eyes and a cold, ruthless smirk, casually suggesting she pick up a new hobby in her next life. They say death is a lot like falling asleep, a peaceful, quiet release from the exhausting grind and heavy karma of the mortal coil. But for some unfortunate souls, waking up on the other side is an absolute nightmare. Pale gasps for air, finding herself submerged in a dark, rippling void instead of the cold dirt. The red-haired necromancer takes in the surreal, starry expanse around her, completely bewildered by the cosmic scenery. Her confusion spikes into panic as a booming voice echoes through the abyss, welcoming her to the realm of the dead. Looming right behind her is a colossal shadowy manifestation of the true king of necromancers. Pale furiously rejects the idea that she's dead, demanding to be sent back to the living. But Archimonde, towering over her in his dark skeletal armor, coldly states that her denial only proves her utter ignorance. Gripping his massive scythe, the devil of the continent announces that it's time to begin the absolute judgment of her horrific sins. He delivers this absolute decree under one name, Archimonde. The red-haired necromancer freezes, the sheer weight of that legendary title crushing her denial. The terrifying reality sets in as she stares at the devil of the continent, the absolute monarch of all necromancy. Reaching out a skeletal hand, the true king commands her to step forward. She violently flinches as an invisible, overwhelming force seizes her. Against her will, Archimonde magically drags her helplessly across the dark water toward his floating form. In the past, Pale kidnapped and tortured innocent people, binding them as undying test subjects for her twisted experiments. Trembling in absolute terror, Pale desperately clings to the belief that her predecessor is long dead 2 centuries ago. As his massive shadow falls over her in the shallow water, she looks up in utter confusion. The towering giant glares down at her, his single gray eye glowing with apocalyptic menace. He coldly declares that from now on she will be his tool, as dozens of black coffins creak open in the void above. Suddenly an unseen force hoists Pale right off her feet, leaving her flailing in the air like a helpless ragdoll. She screams, sheer terror setting in as the weight of becoming his tool finally clicks. Before she can even beg for mercy, she gets violently yanked backward by an invisible grip. She shrieks in absolute despair as a pale hand slams the lid shut, sealing her inside one of the floating black coffins. Hovering below the suspended casket, Archimonde coldly asks if she's afraid to die. His single eye flares with a piercing blue light as he winds up that massive scythe for the finisher. Promising they'll be seeing each other again real soon, the king of necromancers unleashes a devastating, reality-shattering slash. Pale's agonizing screams echo through the dark void as the blade strikes her makeshift prison. A sudden, desperate gasp echoes against the rocky walls of the cavern. Pale sheds a tear of pure relief, entirely convinced that her terrifying encounter with the Grim Reaper was nothing more than a bad dream. But as Dunkel stares down at her in absolute jaw-drop shock, the gruesome reality sets in. Only her living, severed head actually survived the clash. Our boy just calmly stares down at the squirming necromancer, while Dunkel stands behind him completely short-circuiting at the gruesome sight. The knight breaks out in a cold sweat, realizing his young master single-handedly orchestrated this absolute massacre while he was knocked out. Unbothered by the carnage, our hero casually orders his escort to get ready for their next task. Down on the floor, Pale finally notices her distinct lack of a body and descends into a full-blown shrieking panic. Our guy just kneels down to her eye level, demanding her undivided attention. He coldly tells the severed villainess that she needs to accept her grim new reality. The screaming abruptly stops as her eyes widen, a horrifying realization clicking into place. In her mind's eye, the boy's chilling tone perfectly overlaps with the towering armored phantom from her nightmare. A vision of Archimonde flashes before her, echoing his ominous promise that they would meet again. Staring up in sheer terror, the absolute dread sets in. The rumors are true, and this silver-haired kid is the literal devil of the continent. But right before she can shriek his true name, our guy just presses a finger to her lips. He hits her with a quiet shush, his deadpan gaze piercing straight through whatever is left of her soul. Exhaling a suffocating dark purple aura, our hero gets straight to business, demanding the intel. With the massive terrifying specter of his past self looming behind him, my guy rattles off his demands. Who sent her, how many there are, and what their grand plan is. Klein lays out a brutal multiple-choice question. Spill the beans for a quick painless death or keep her mouth shut and win the grand prize of eternal life. The absolute horror dawns on Pale as the math finally clicks in her head. He's threatening to keep her conscious indefinitely, trapped as a helpless talking paperweight on the dirty cave floor. Flashing a sadistic smile, the young master challenges her to see how long she can hold out before the waterworks start. Moments later, Dunkel is diligently playing secretary, scribbling down every single detail in a little notebook. The commander reports back to our boy, confirming that every single syllable of Pale's tearful confession is officially on the record. Having squeezed every drop of use out of her, the kid turns his back, ready to finally ditch this wretched mine. Left in the dirt, the severed necromancer desperately calls out, begging to know what happens to her now. She frantically pleads her case, crying that she followed his orders and spilled everything they asked for. Our boy pauses mid-step, a deeply sinister smirk creeping across his face as he remembers one last detail. Cheerfully reminds her of his promise to put her out of her misery, bringing actual tears of relief to the necromancer's eyes. But as glowing blue mana pools in his hands, that sinister smile stretches into something truly wicked. With a flick of his wrist, he casts a preservation spell, enveloping her severed head in blue magical energy. Crouching low, he cruelly informs her that she's not dying today. She just needs to hold out for about a week. A sickening, skittering sound begins to echo through the dark cavern. Stepping back, he casually explains that the local scavengers will be handling her execution. Pale screams in absolute terror as a massive writhing swarm of cockroaches pours out of the shadows. The insects flood over her face, biting and consuming her alive as she shrieks in pure agony. Walking away, our hero shoots her one last cold smirk, genuinely thanking her for being such a useful tool. Her wide, horrified eye is completely swallowed by the swarm as her screams reach a blood-curdling fever pitch. She curses Archimonde's name to the very end as the two men casually stroll down the tunnel, leaving her to her gruesome fate. Sometime later, under a bright blue sky, the comic cuts to the peaceful, quiet grounds of the Rhineland estate. Inside a well-lit office, Duke Heinkel pores over a highly concerning document at his desk. He reads the grim report aloud, noting that the Empire has unleashed necromancers in the north while the Holy Order conveniently turns a blind eye. Standing at attention before his father, our boy confirms that every word of the intel is entirely accurate. He breaks down the staggering numbers. Over 100 undead test subjects and dozens of missing villagers, while calling out the local nobles for being too busy playing politics to actually protect their people. Taking the threat seriously, Heinkel immediately orders an attendant to have Butler Berkman dispatch the night order and request border reinforcements. The Duke then looks at his son with genuine pride, praising him for his incredible work in uncovering the plot. Playing the part of the humble son, our hero credits Dunkel for his survival, internally noting their mutual agreement to keep his own necromancy strictly off the record. Though a drop of sweat rolls down his face as he pictures the rigid knight, silently praying the man actually knows how to keep his mouth shut. Pushing the paperwork aside, Heinkel leans forward and slides a small object across the desk. He tells Klein that he had originally planned to test him with a few more missions, but this latest achievement proves those trials are no longer necessary. Resting on the polished wood is the metallic wolf head token of a true Rhineland knight. Heinkel officially appoints his son as an apprentice knight, apologizing that the starting rank might not seem like enough of a reward. But our guy just pins the shiny new badge to his lapel with a confident smirk, assuring the Duke that it's plenty. Heinkel just watches him, silently taking in his son's sudden, undeniable glow-up. The Duke finally tells him to go get some rest, and Klein hits him with a perfectly respectful bow. With a soft click, the heavy double doors seal the office behind him. Meanwhile, Butler Berkman is sweating over the official battle report, absolutely mind-blown by the sheer scale of the undead army the kid just survived. Realizing they've got a literal prodigy on their hands, the old man orders a subordinate to draft an urgent letter to his brother. As Klein walks away, Berkman's dictated letter echoes in his wake, claiming that the once-in-a-generation genius his brother has been hunting for is right here. Strolling down the Grand Hall, our hero is internally laughing at his modest new rank. See, the Night Station isn't just some fancy club. It's a highly classified military zone with zero tolerance for unapproved visitors. A vision of Garrison's scarred, terrifying mug flashes in his mind, but Klein just smirks, completely convinced he's finally out of the crazy priest's jurisdiction. Brushing a thumb over his wolf head pin, the young master doubles down on his ultimate endgame, dragging the Rhineland name back to the absolute top of the food chain. Bro starts cooking up his next master plan, completely oblivious to the tiny pigtail-wearing missile currently sprinting right at him. She crashes into our guy with the force of a freight train, nearly folding him in half. Trembling in comedic agony, he complains that she just shattered his spine, assuming the kid is just throwing a tantrum over missing snacks. Erin crosses her arms indignantly, acting deeply offended by the accusation, completely ignoring the massive cookie crumbs still plastered to her face. Our guy just sighs and tries to shoo her toward the kitchen for a refill, but the gesture suddenly jogs her memory. With a bright, cheerful shout, she drops an absolute bombshell: Priest Garrison is here, right now. Our hero freezes dead in his tracks, the color instantly draining from his face. Gritty, blood-soaked visions of the scarred, violent priest flash behind his eyes like a horror movie trailer. Right on cue, a deep, menacing voice rumbles from directly behind him, casually asking how the mission went. Cold sweat breaks out across his neck as the towering shadow of his worst nightmare looms over his shoulder. The Pope's absolute human weapon glares down at him, formally addressing the young master with a terrifying, suffocating intensity. 10 years ago, the estate is in absolute shambles as a servant desperately screams out for our boy. The search party scours the shadowy forest, their panicked voices echoing through the trees. The men regroup in the brush, shaking their heads as they come up completely empty-handed. They panic that he's vanished right before his scheduled purification ritual, while high above their heads, little Klein clings to a thick tree branch for dear life. A horrific vision of Priest Garrison's rituals flashes through his mind, being strung up and water-tortured. And my guy is absolutely not falling for that bait again. As the clueless searchers finally give up and head back toward the mansion, our hero breathes a massive sigh of relief. The forest canopy grows dead quiet as the sun dips below the horizon. Exhausted from the sheer stress of dodging his tormentor, the kid drifts off to sleep right there in his hiding spot. Suddenly he jolts awake, a fresh nightmare of the priest's torture sending him into a cold sweat. Looking up at the glowing moon, he realizes he just slept straight through the entire evening. Figuring the coast is finally clear, he slowly begins his descent down the massive trunk. But a sudden rustling below makes him freeze in his tracks, his eyes going wide as he spots something horrifying in the darkness. Our boy frantically scrambles back up the bark as a pack of massive northern gray bears gathers at the base of his tree. These aren't your average predators. They're ferocious beasts infamous for their brutal, bloodthirsty hunts. Just one look at those razor-sharp, flesh-shredding claws is enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. Stripped of his necromancy, Klein knows he's nothing more than a midnight snack, leaving him no choice but to wait them out. Trapped on his wooden island, the kid huddles against the biting northern wind, shivering violently as the temperature drops. He remembers it clearly. In his past life he had been a dark king, who gave absolutely everything to protect the unjustly slain. Yet fate had played the cruelest joke of all, rebirthing him directly into the bloodline of Berkel Rhineland, the very hero who executed him. Instead of ruling, his second life had been reduced to nothing but pathetic running and hiding. The bitter chill seeps deep into his bones, threatening to freeze him solid. A memory hits him. Once, long before any of this, angry mobs had relentlessly hunted him down as the feared devil of the continent. A hatred that had bled perfectly into his new life, where whispering servants had ostracized him as a cursed child. The memory fades. Completely alone under a vast and different starry sky, the exhausted boy slowly succumbs to the freezing temperatures. When his eyes finally fluttered open, the biting wind had vanished. Instead, our boy found himself being carried through the dark woods on a broad, steady back. Garrison glanced over his shoulder, his tone surprisingly gentle as he checked if the young master was awake. Delirious, Klein asked if he was dead, but the priest just chuckled, explaining he'd plucked him unconscious from the tree. When my guy weakly asked about the massive bears, Garrison cheerfully noted he'd already slaughtered the beasts. Burning with a severe fever, our hero stubbornly demanded to be put down, refusing to accept help from his daily tormentor. He glared at the back of the priest's head, demanding to know why Garrison had even bothered to save him. He accused the scarred man of wanting him dead more than anyone else in the entire estate. Garrison fell silent for a moment, his gaze drifting up to the vast starry sky. He calmly noted that stars don't create their own darkness, they merely shine where they are placed. Garrison remembers it clearly. Leaving the orphan bear cubs alive, explaining that young lives are just like them, completely ignorant of right and wrong. With unwavering resolve, Garrison stated his absolute core belief: he had no right to sever the potential of a young being. The young boy could only stare, completely stunned by such a profound, noble philosophy coming from the very man who tormented him. But he quickly scoffed, pointing out the sheer, undeniable hypocrisy of preaching about potential after subjecting him to daily water torture. Garrison's tone abruptly shifted, turning ice-cold as he laid out one grim, inescapable condition. He warned the child that if he ever chose to embrace the darkness, if he turned out to be the true Archiman the priest was hunting, a single dead leaf detached from a barren branch drifting through the freezing night air. Back to the present, Garrison finishes that exact same decade-old threat in the present day, promising to execute the teenager with his own 2 hands. The towering proxy looks down at our hero, formally greeting young Master Klein after his suspiciously long absence. Our boy swallows hard, tensely acknowledging the monster who has haunted his every waking nightmare. The scarred man casually mentions he was away on urgent business at the Holy Order, where an old colleague handed him something rather interesting. He holds up a cross-shaped glass vial, its center swirling with a sinister red liquid. Our guy's eyes blow wide in sheer, unadulterated panic. He instantly recognizes it as an ectoplasm, a high-level tool used by the church to capture spiritual energy. Garrison remember few days ago. During the chaotic forest ambush, the hooded necromancer suddenly appeared. The scarred man personally blasted the dark mage backward into a bloody splatter on the spot. Garrison takes a heavy, echoing step forward and drops an absolute bombshell. According to the ectoplasm's reading, there wasn't just one necromancer's trace left in those woods. There were 2. In his mind's eye, our boy pictures his own glowing heart hammering against his ribs like a frantic war drum. He visualizes the suffocating, monstrous aura radiating from the priest as a swirling dark mass threatening to crush him flat. A terrifying mental image of his tormentor flashes before him, as his inherited instincts as the king of necromancers scream that this towering shadow is a lethal threat. Sweating bullets in the grand hall, Klein frantically calculates his odds, realizing his mimicry ability is entirely useless if he can't even survive seeing the first strike. The proxy cuts right through the panic with a chilling deadpan demand: use necromancy right now. He offers a twisted sliver of mercy. If our hero's magic is merely basic corpse reanimation, it'll just be a formal report to the Order. But if it's the original, soul-manipulating dark art of the devil of the continent, this absolute human weapon promises that my guy will not leave this hall alive. He remembers it clearly. 2 centuries ago, an angry mob tore him apart, their hateful screams echoing in his final moments. A strained, defiant smirk creeps onto our boy's sweating face despite the overwhelming terror. He actually laughs at the sheer absurdity of the situation, calling out the absolute hypocrisy of a man who water-tortured him daily now playing the righteous judge. Klein remembers how years ago a light-haired youth from his past spoke of protecting the future of the young, dropping cryptic words that never quite made sense back then. But looking at Garrison now, he finally understood that this uncompromising vow to never sever a child's potential was the exact same twisted justice driving the priest. Looking the proxy dead in the eye, my guy acknowledges that the daily torture wasn't born out of simple hatred, catching the absolute human weapon totally off guard. A memory flashes of his past life, where a holy knight struck him down, leaving him to choke on the bitter taste of ultimate defeat. And now here he stands, clenching his fist so hard his knuckles turn white, our hero's lingering trauma completely morphs into a burning white-hot rage. He flat-out refuses to be backed into a corner, declaring to the priest's face that he is done running from his fate and will choose his own path. Garrison lets out a heavy sigh, his broad shoulders tensing up as he accepts the teenager's stubborn defiance. Dropping the evidence file, the scarred man decides to do things the hard way and beat the absolute truth out of him. Without a single frame of warning, Garrison explodes forward like a freight train, raising a massive fist for a lethal fight-forcing strike. As that massive fist eclipses, our boy's mind goes into absolute overdrive to find an escape route. The scarred priest comes crashing down from above, putting his entire body weight into a devastating meteor-like haymaker. Klein throws his weight backward, bracing for dear life as that monstrous punch craters the floor right in front of him. A blinding shockwave of pure kinetic force washes over his face, illuminating his wide, panicked eyes. Time seems to slow to a crawl as the reflection of that lethal strike burns into his retinas. But by some absolute miracle, our hero manages to slide just a hair out of the direct blast zone. Garrison's glowing orange eye actually twitches in shock, completely caught off guard by the kid's unnatural evasion stats. Hitting the deck, our guy takes a split second to realize he actually survived the opening move. Instantly, the terrified screams of the estate staff echo through the grand hall. The gathered servants are completely paralyzed with horror, utterly baffled as to why the holy man is suddenly trying to turn their young master into a red stain on the carpet. Down in the dust, Klein spots a golden window of opportunity and immediately reaches for his hip to draw his blade. But our hero's hand grasps nothing but empty air. He looks up to find the scarred priest looming over him, casually dangling the stolen blade from his grip. With a dismissive flick of the wrist, Garrison tosses the weapon clear across the room, completely disarming the teenager. The holy man openly mocks the very idea of a necromancer relying on steel, and a chilling realization washes over our guy. Staring down with absolute unfiltered murderous intent, the proxy has zero intention of taking prisoners today. He drops a massive aura-infused sledgehammer of a punch straight down toward the defenseless boy. But instead of cowering in fear, Klein just stares up at the incoming death blow and flashes a cold, arrogant smirk. The strike connects with a deafening roar, blasting a silhouette backward through the air like a ragdoll. The sheer kinetic force of the impact completely obliterates the surrounding architecture, tearing the grand hall apart. Massive chunks of masonry rain from the ceiling as the once pristine estate is instantly reduced to an active war zone. Terrified bystanders dive for cover, screaming as they pray they aren't crushed by the catastrophic collateral damage. As the thick, choking dust finally begins to settle, a ragged cough echoes out from the center of the wreckage. Garrison stands tall in the crater, completely unfazed as panicked voices scream for the guards. But as the debris parts, the priest narrows his eyes at a new silhouette stepping into the fray. Standing protectively in front of our boy with a drawn blade, the newcomer demands to know exactly what Garrison thinks he's doing. With piercing blue eyes and an aura of absolute authority, Duke Heinkel Rhineland has officially stepped up to protect his son. A faint smirk crosses our boys' faces because things are going as he expected. Standing in the wreckage, grinning like an absolute menace, he sweats bullet. Down the corridor, the estate guards are finally getting their act together. They rush toward the epicenter of the chaos, desperate to protect their lords. But the second they arrive on the scene, the reinforcements freeze in absolute shock. My guy's strategy was big brain simple. Stall just long enough for the knights to sense the killing intent and come running. Because when you're staring down a raid boss like Priest Garrison, you don't just need a weapon. You need an entire army. Duke Heinkel holds the front line, demanding to know if the proxy really just tried to flat-out murder his son. Garrison doesn't even blink, stating the obvious. Klein used the forbidden taboo of necromancy. The Duke claps back that outside the Holy Kingdom's borders, raising the dead isn't actually breaking any laws. But the scarred man presses the issue, reminding Heinkel exactly what kind of target this paints on the kid's back. Heinkel's eyes narrow into slits, declaring that his son already suffered 7 years of torture over baseless rumors, and he absolutely refuses to let history repeat itself. Because at the end of the day, he is this kid's father. The Duke levels his blade, giving the proxy one last chance to pack it up or face the full wrath of House Rhineland. But the scarred priest's only response is a low, ominous chuckle. That chuckle spirals into a booming, fanatical laugh as Garrison starts spitting out a terrifying holy vow. With an unhinged grin, he declares that he'll show absolutely zero mercy to heretics. A massive shockwave of blinding golden energy instantly erupts from the madman, forcing Heinkel to physically body-block the blast to protect our guy. Garrison's muscles practically tearing through his uniform, as his holy aura flares up like a literal supernova. The sheer pressure of his power sends the armored guards skidding backward, their desperate warnings completely drowned out by the roaring energy. Even Dunkel has to throw an arm up just to shield his eyes from the blinding glare. As red aura swirls around his blade, the chilling realization hits Dunkel. The knights are at the danger if both powerhouses collide. Unable to handle the spiritual weight, the grand hall's ceiling violently cracks and begins to cave in. As Heinkel takes his position, a knight screams for everyone to brace themselves as the entire mansion starts coming down on their heads. Garrison isn't listening, channeling an apocalyptic amount of golden holy energy like he's charging up a spirit bomb. Heinkel throws out one final warning, telling the proxy to power down before things get ugly. But the scarred fanatic just roars that this is God's judgment on the Rhineland family. He stomps his boot down hard enough to completely shatter the stone floor, and detonates a massive golden shockwave that rips right through the room. The Duke doesn't even flinch, his eyes locked dead on the incoming nuke. The swordsman swings his blade with terrifying speed, leaving a trail of pure crimson mana, unleashing a massive tsunami of red aura that collides head-on with the holy light in an epic mid-air clash. And to everyone's absolute shock, Heinkel's raw power completely overpowers the proxy, stopping Garrison Ataki in the mid. The priest desperately tries to punch his way through the crimson energy wave. But as the two absolute power collied, the explosion happened, carving out a massive crater on impact. Garrison casually steps back through the dust, looking completely unbothered. But Garrison instantly erupts from the crater, sending debris and a poor bystander flying into the stratosphere. The proxy winds up a devastating golden-charged haymaker of condemnation. Einkel glances over his shoulder, realizing he might not be able to pivot in time to protect our boy. The Duke's eyes widen as the lethal fist closes the distance. But suddenly Duke drops into the fray, unleashing the Meteor Sword's second form to intercept the strike. The two overwhelming attacks about to collide in a blinding, star-shaped flash, detonating into a massive, hull-shattering explosion that absolutely nukes the battlefield. Bystanders desperately brace themselves as the sheer kinetic force of the shockwave threatens to blow them away. Meanwhile, our hero stands in the middle of the chaos, completely bewildered by how ridiculously out of hand this family drama has gotten. Right as the dust settles, a tiny voice screams for everyone to stop, and Aaron literally runs right into the crossfire of this apocalyptic deathmatch. Einkel, Garrison, and my guy all instantly freeze in absolute sheer panic. Dunkel just stares, absolutely flabbergasted. Dunkel immediately sprints toward her, screaming for the kid to get out of the center, wondering why on earth a maid is casually strolling through an active war zone. But Aaron doesn't even flinch, confidently reaching her hand right out toward the terrifying proxy, and straight up demands the gift he promised her. The entire room collectively short-circuits at the sheer audacity. Garrison blinks, completely thrown off his murder groove as the girl pesters him about her treats. She literally starts singing a nursery rhyme about punishing liars, leaving our guy to wonder if her total inability to read the room is an actual superpower. Miraculously, the absolute human weapon just sighs and reaches into his coat, pulling out a tiny box of cookies from some famous bakery. Aaron immediately goes to town on the snacks, squealing with pure joy while standing in the rubble of a destroyed mansion surrounded by heavily armed knights. She innocently looks up and asks the scarred priest about his own childhood. A flashback hits him. Decades ago, he grew up in a brutal, starving hellhole where kids were kept in shackles and rarely survived. Back in the present, the priest drops the name of that cursed place, the Archimand Order. Our boy's blood runs absolutely cold because he has zero memory of starting a twisted fan club in his past life. With grim determination, Garrison vows to wipe the cult off the face of the earth no matter the cost. His terrifying aura softens as he looks down at Aaron, telling the kid to enjoy the treats for his sake since it's the only comfort he has left. But the wholesome mood instantly evaporates when those glowing golden eyes snap right back to our hero. He leaves the young master with one final, ominous promise that it won't end like this. The entire ruined hall watches in dead silence as the absolute human weapon turns his back and walks away. The exact second the priest is out of earshot, Klein collapses to the floor, completely drenched in sweat. My guy realizes he just barely dodged a game over screen, and there is zero chance his HP bar survives a round 2. Because the priest parting threat isn't just a warning. It's a guaranteed deathmatch where only one of them walks away breathing. The heavy tension shatters instantly when Aaron pops into his peripheral vision, offering him a bite of her snack and nearly giving our hero a literal heart attack. Letting out a massive sigh, Klein tells the oblivious maid to go hit up the chef for an entire strawberry cake on his tab. She blasts off like a rocket, screaming in pure unadulterated joy. Watching her go, this guy manages a weak smile at the sheer absurdity of the whiplash, but the wholesome moment is violently cut short when a stern voice calls his name. His smile instantly vanishes as he realizes he hasn't cleared the boss rush just yet. Duke Heinkel towers over him, flatly stating that they need to have a very private chat. The scene shifts to the opulent, dimly lit interior of the family head's grand study. Heinkel doesn't beat around the bush, asking point blank if his son has actually been dabbling in the dark arts. Whipping around in absolute fury, the patriarch demands to know why on earth Klein would willingly choose the exact same magic that got him locked in a hellish reformatory for 7 years. Our boy keeps his eyes glued to the floor as his father presses harder, demanding to know how he even pulled this off. Without missing a beat, Klein drops a flawlessly smooth lie, claiming he stumbled upon the forbidden knowledge hidden away in his late mother's annex. The Duke is completely stunned by the mention of his late wife, buying the fabricated excuse without a second thought. Pressing his advantage, our boy coldly states that the dark arts were the only way he was making it out of that restricted mine alive. Heinkel desperately argues that his swordsmanship should have been enough, but the young master shuts that naive notion down immediately. In his mind's eye, he pictures the grotesque cyclops and slaughtered mercenaries, as he reminds his father that a monolith's body and a blade wouldn't have scratched the horrors he faced. Clenching his fist, our guy reveals the terrifying truth. The Empire has been secretly deploying a necromancer to undermine the North right under their noses. And with that, he boldly lays his cards on the table, offering himself up as House Rhineland's official necromancer. He stares the patriarch down, challenging him to use this taboo power to save their declining family, or sit back and let their entire legacy perish in the dirt. The heavy ultimatum hangs in the air as Heinkel turns away, his mind drifting back to the past. 8 years ago, a young Klein first returned to the Grand Estate. The boy had just endured 7 grueling years locked away in a hellish reformatory. Yet as the Duke looked down at his son, he saw a child completely devoid of any anger or resentment. Instead, the boy simply looked up and quietly announced he was home. Back in the present, Heinkel stares at his son, wondering if our boy has been burying a deep, festering resentment all these years. But the Duke knows he failed to protect him, conceding that he has neither the right nor the reason to stand in his way now. He turns back to meet Klein's unwavering gaze, and finally gives him his blessing, telling him to do exactly as he wishes. The heavy standoff between father and son settles into a solemn, unspoken understanding. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit room, a shadowy figure decides it's finally time to meet the young master. She calls out to Laya, and the knight bows her head in absolute obedience to the ultimate authority of the Branch family, Grand Duchess Hellion. But before Laya can answer that summons, she's got a massive mess to clean up in a nearby town. A massive explosion suddenly rips through the streets, blasting a fleeing man backward through a cloud of debris. And stepping out of the smoke is a towering, muscle-bound beast with glowing red eyes. He's already absolutely folded the local mercenary band, leaving their scarred leader trembling in the dirt as the terrifying reality of their power gap sets in. Staring up into a pair of glowing red eyes and a twisted, vein-bulging smile, the survivor understands one chilling truth. This isn't a man, it's a literal monster. With nowhere left to run, the scarred mercenary curses his luck and white-knuckles his sword, his hands trembling as he prepares for a hopeless final stand. Screaming a desperate battle cry, he brings his blade down with everything he's got. But the slash does absolutely zero damage to the massive purple-skinned monster. The beast doesn't even blink, effortlessly shattering the steel before burying a massive purple-veined fist straight into the poor guy's face. The force was enough to send the man like a rag doll, unleashing a brutal shockwave that sends a fleeing civilian tumbling backward. The terrified man scrambles to his feet and bolts, completely abandoning the 2 young children left sitting helpless in the dirt. Looming over his next targets, the massive purple-skinned monster tightens his grip around a dark, jagged rock. He closes the gap on a fleeing mercenary in a heartbeat, delivering a devastating strike to the man's back, obligating him in a spray of blood. As the last mercenary hits the dirt, the massive purple-skinned monster just stares at his own hand, watching the dark energy pour off his skin. A sick, sadistic grin splits his face as he revels in the absolute high of his newfound power. But the slaughter isn't over yet, and his terrifying shadow falls right back over the helpless kids left in the rubble. The young blonde boy clings to his sister for dear life, sobbing into her jacket that he's terrified. Towering over his tiny victims, the beast hoists a massive stone pillar high above his head like it weighs absolutely nothing. He mockingly tells the trembling kids not to cry. Then he simply opens his hand, letting the crushing weight plummet straight down to flatten them. But a split second before impact, that sadistic smirk vanishes from his face. Captain Laya drops in from the sky, leaping high above the hulking brute. She swings her glowing blue polearm with lethal precision, slicing a massive gash right into the monster's shoulder. Her striking pink eyes are locked in absolute icy focus. Down below, completely unaware of the epic rescue, the young girl just squeezes her eyes shut and braces for the end. But instead of hitting the beast, her glowing blade cleaves right through the falling stone pillar, shattering it into harmless dust before it can crush the kids. Without missing a beat, she calmly orders the terrified siblings to clear out. The little ones don't need to be told twice, scrambling away to safety as fast as their legs can carry them. Sensing an opening while her back is turned, the purple brute winds up a massive haymaker to crush her from behind. Unfortunately for him, the captain's reflexes are on another level. She effortlessly launches into a backward flip, completely evading the ground-shattering blow. Even upside down in midair, her expression doesn't shift a single inch. Her pink eye flashes with a dangerous, predatory glint. Using her momentum, she whips her polearm around in a blinding blue arc, slashing right across the monster. Blood drips down the brute's face, but instead of staggering, his manic grin just stretches wider. His glowing red eye locks onto her with pure bloodlust. He actually praises her strength before throwing another devastating hook, forcing Laya to duck low beneath the massive fist. But this time the brute catches on, his massive hand clamping down like a vice on the shaft of her weapon. He tries to yank her right off her feet, but Laya just rides the momentum, launching herself into a graceful midair spin. Her eyes flash with absolute focus as she tightens her grip for the counter. Coming down hard, she slams the polearm into the pavement, detonating a massive shockwave of pure blue energy. The sheer force of the AoE blast sends the hulking monster crash back into the rubble. He coughs up a mouthful of blood, grinning as he admits that one actually stung a bit. Before he can even recover, a blinding blue starburst suddenly flares high in the night sky. A colossal glowing sword plummets toward the earth like an orbital strike, with the captain diving right behind it. The beast can only stare up in stunned silence as the blinding light consumes his entire field of vision. The impact hits like a meteor, triggering a devastating explosion that absolutely obliterates the street. Thick clouds of dust and pulverized concrete billow out from the massive crater. Yet somehow this absolute tank survives the nuke, coughing up dark blood through a jagged psychotic grin. When the dust finally settles, the beast is left pinned to the crumbling wall as Laya casually strolls up to her handiwork. Her squad finally catches up to the scene, calling out to their captain as she inspects the catch. One of the guards reports that this is already the third time this month some random thug has suddenly gone completely berserk. He points out that the freakish glowing purple veins are a dead match for all the other eyewitness accounts. Groaning against the stone, the monster sneers that absolutely anyone can achieve this kind of godlike strength. He flashes a manic, bloody grin, boasting that with this secret power, they can even surpass the legendary Archimand. Laya violently yanks her spear free, silencing his delusions with a brutal spray of dark blood. She coldly informs the slumping trash that nobody can ever match Archimand, and a freak like him doesn't even have the right to speak the name. Still, his final words have definitely piqued her interest, and the captain resolves to hunt down the source of this mystery steroid herself. Meanwhile, back at the Rhineland estate, the cleanup crew is working overtime. The place is an absolute disaster zone, with workers hauling away the massive piles of rubble left in the wake of Priest Garrison's holy rampage. One of the guys wipes his brow and mutters that they're lucky the whole manor didn't collapse, though his partner vehemently calls bullshit on that silver lining. The crew credits Duke Heinkel for stepping in when he did, saving the entire estate from being blown off the map. As they haul the rubble, one of them brings up a wild rumor that the young maid Erin actually jumped in and stopped the fight. They laugh it off as completely impossible, totally oblivious to the ominous shadowy aura trailing right behind the little girl's footsteps. Erin just hums a cheerful tune while effortlessly carrying a massive stack of books, her sweet facade hiding a terrifying secret. She sing-songs a greeting to our boy, and waltzes right into his study, dropping the heavy reading material onto his desk. Klein adjusts his glasses, genuinely surprised by the delivery. The red-haired maid just stares back at him with a completely blank expression, before casually dropping a piece of gossip she heard. That he's gotten so handsome, girls won't leave him alone and are going to toy with him. Our hero lets out a heavy sigh, realizing she's been eavesdropping on the maid's trashy romance novels, and offers to read her some proper fairy tales instead. Though he gently adds that story time will have to wait because he's going to be quite busy for a while. Rewind to a week ago, when Duke Heinkel and Priest Garrison clashed in a devastating explosion of power. The estate is still undergoing massive repairs from that very clash. And my guy knows full well he only survived because Erin obliviously stumbled into the crossfire. Still, brushing shoulders with death wasn't entirely without its perks. Dunkel rolls in a massive cart stacked high with advanced medical and anatomical texts, leaving the little maid absolutely devastated that she didn't get her fairy tales. He remembers it clearly. In his past life as Archimand, he had to work like a dog just to learn a single spell formula. He had to scheme, plot, and risk his neck just to get his hands on a torn page of a grimoire. He was pinned to the stone and brutally stomped on by armored guards, nearly losing his fingers for his thirst for knowledge. Back then, magic was strictly hoarded by privileged nobles and robed mages, locked away behind an impenetrable glass wall. That was then. Now, as a Rhineland, our boy has unlimited, undisputed access to every single field of study he could ever desire. Flipping through the pages, he's absolutely thrilled to discover that in the 2 centuries since his execution, countless new theories and magic circuits have been developed. Radiating a manic, crackling blue aura that completely unnerves the bystanders, Klein enthusiastically vows to cram 200 years of evolution straight into his brain. But before he can dive fully into the grind, something specific catches his eye. He pauses, his attention snagged by a particularly ominous-looking tome. While our boy read the name Rudel Rhineland, Dunkel interrupts the silence, calling our boy. The subordinate is completely baffled, asking why the young master is suddenly hoarding anatomy texts and sketching out insane diagrams. Our hero just smirks, holding up a sheet of parchment and casually explaining that it's a highly advanced spiritual body construction formula. Both the servant and Erin stare back with absolute zero comprehension, prompting Klein to remind them of the skeletal vanguard he summoned during the mercenary ambush. Deciding to give them a live demonstration, he sprinkles a pinch of mysterious sand right onto the magic circle drawn on his desk. Hovering his hand over the parchment, he channels a stream of crackling blue magi straight into the array. Erin leans in, her eyes wide with absolute wonder. A glowing ethereal skeletal spirit materializes right in the study, as Klein breaks down his unique brand of necromancy, using a contracted soul's own magic to forge its physical vessel. The red-haired maid is completely mesmerized, though my guy notes that the average soul can only manage a basic bone structure. They simply lack the raw magic power and the ego required to manifest anything more complex than a brittle skeleton. He pictures his undead legion in his mind's eye, noting that while they make for a highly coordinated, unkillable army. Rewind to the recent ambush, Dalton effortlessly sliced through a skeleton, proving that basic boneboy just didn't cut it against high-tier fighters, which was exactly why our boy had to put the trash out himself. The young master drops a hypothetical that instantly shifts the vibe in the room from a TED Talk to a horror movie. He paints a blurry, ominous picture of what would happen if he skipped the cannon fodder and hooked the spirit of a legendary knight overflowing with immense magic power. The Dunkel's eyes practically bulge out of his skull as the horrifying realization clicks into place. Klein quickly waves off the panic, assuring his guard that he has no immediate plans to craft a boss-tier summon, mostly because souls with that kind of juice are incredibly rare drops. He leans back in his chair, figuring it's a problem for future Klein, when a sudden knock interrupts his plotting. Butler Veerman steps into the study, holding out a sealed envelope like it's a piece of evidence. The older man announces an urgent invitation from House Paul Wyvern, immediately tipping this guy off that it involves Captain Lia's family. An image of the blonde knight flashes through his mind as he remembers her provocative promise to give a kiss if he won his duel. But the servant is instantly on high alert, questioning why an urgent political matter is bypassing the Duke and coming straight to a teenager. The plot thickens when Veerman reveals the sender is actually Grand Duchess Hellion, causing Klein to physically flinch at the name drop. The guard immediately calls out the massive red flag, pointing out that a branch family leader summoning the main house's heir to their home turf is a textbook trap. However, the older butler counters that since Hellion is Heinkel's biological sister, brushing her off would be a political disaster. Without missing a beat, our boy agrees to the trip, leaving the Dunkel stunned. Glancing down at his magic circle, the gears start turning in his head. He hadn't planned on forging a high-tier undead weapon quite this soon, but this little field trip just gave him the perfect excuse. Later that night, the estate is completely still. Klein cracks open Erin's door, making sure the red-haired maid is out cold. As she sleep mumbles about her promised treats, he slips away down the dark corridor, lantern in hand. Outside, a pale full moon hangs over the grounds. Soft footsteps echo against the brick path as he ventures into the cold night. His mind drifts to the history of Rudolf Rhineland, the 6th Duke. Heinkel's father was a tragic hero who fell early, but he remains the only warrior in their lineage whose strength ever rivaled the legendary 1st Duke, Berkel. Arriving at his destination, my guy's eyes lock onto the prize, absolutely dead set on making that legendary soul his own. Looming before him is the imposing, statue-lined structure of the family mausoleum. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, he steps into the sacred grounds. The grand hall is solemn and silent, a massive tomb housing the remains of centuries of Rhinelands. His lantern cuts through the gloom as he walks past the silent stone guardians. Scanning the room, he notes that most of the spirits here have already moved on, leaving not a single trace behind. But our hero extends his hand, releasing a wave of blue ethereal energy to sweep the vast space. The magic immediately latches onto a specific, ornate stone coffin. A soul still bound by lingering attachments. Klein approaches the tomb, wryly wondering what Duke Heinkel is going to say when he finds out about this little midnight grave-robbing session. He sets his lantern down on the cold floor. A tense, audacious smirk crosses his face. Engulfing his hand in blue flames, my guy cheekily apologizes in advance for being an unfilial grandson. Pressing his magic into the coffin, he begins the ancient ritual chant to rip his ancestor's soul back into the world of the living. The blue energy flares violently as our guy commands the lingering spirit to answer his call. Slowly, a shadowy, ethereal silhouette rises from the stone. Outside, the grand mausoleum stands silent under the pale moonlight. But a pair of black dress shoes quietly crunches onto the grounds. Inside, a booming voice echoes from the coffin, demanding the Necromancer show himself. With a deafening swoosh, the magical fire passed the gate. Klein feels his mana reserves plummet, realizing the former Duke's soul is greedily absorbing every last drop. High above, the wind howls past the moonlit clouds. Our hero visualizes the ultimate undead weapon, a Death Knight, the absolute highest tier summon, created by anchoring a powerful warrior's soul to a spirit vessel. To forge this dark bond, a master must either break the spirit with overwhelming magic or earn its willing consent. The flames condense into a hulking muscular entity, who chuckles at the irony of his cute grandson coming to visit, before realizing he's actually staring down the Rhineland family's ancient nemesis. The 6th Duke isn't exactly thrilled, manifesting a colossal greatsword of pure blue fire as his glowing yellow eyes narrow. Because souls see essence rather than form, Rudolf instantly recognizes that the spirit piloting his descendants' meat suit is none other than the devil of the continent. Our boy doesn't even try to deny it, smoothly insisting that his proposed contract is a perfectly fair deal to release the old man from his lingering karma. But the Duke isn't about to shake hands with his family's ancient nemesis that easily. The air howls as the sound of the clashing blade howls. Klein draws his own weapon in a flash, catching the devastating overhead strike in a blinding shower of sparks. Holding his ground without breaking a sweat, my guy flashes a cocky smirk, offering to prove the sincerity of his words through a clash of steel. The flaming phantom just scoffs, pointing out the hilarious irony of a grave robber invoking knightly trust right after prying open his own ancestor's coffin. And with that, under the pale moonlight, this ultimate battle of family insubordination officially kicks off. The Empire has spent 2 centuries plotting to conquer the entire continent, but the 3 great independent duchies have always stood in their way, and leading the branch family forces of the north is our boy's formidable aunt, Grand Duchess Hellion. Back in his sunlit study, Klein reads over a summons from her, barely looking up when Dunkel approaches to report the massive delivery of books is finally sorted. The young master casually mentions he'll be leaving for House Paul Wyvern in 3 days, prompting the knight to read the invitation and immediately panic when he realizes he isn't allowed to tag along. Our hero admits it's a deadly trap, but insists he has to walk right into it to gather crucial intelligence. He needs to know exactly what Hellion is plotting and how the branch family's power structure is organized, flashing a sinister smirk as he suggests he could always just turn her aides into undead and force them to slaughter each other. But Dunkel immediately shuts that down, arguing that such ruthless tactics make them no better than their enemies, which only makes my guy challenge Dunkel's knightly morals, asking exactly what's wrong with doing bad things to bad people. He remembers it clearly, a recent argument where he'd called out the hypocrisy of the branch family living in luxury on stolen wealth while the main house rotted. But even faced with that reality, Dunkel had stood his ground and flat out refused to trade their principles for a quick profit. When our boy pushed back asking if those ideals were really worth starving for, Dunkel answered with the spiritual weight of their ancestors radiating behind him, declaring them the most important things in the world. Klein had just sat there in silence, but beneath the table his fist clenched in quiet relief that Dunkel still held onto that light, because he knew his own future was going to be entirely consumed by the dark. Back in the present, under the pale moonlight of the mausoleum, Klein finishes his thought and boldly declares himself an evil necromancer to the flaming phantom of his ancestor. Rudol doesn't even blink, instead lunging forward as a massive blur of blue fire, but our hero rushes right back in to meet him with a calculated thrust. He grips his dagger tightly, perfectly predicting the spirit's standard attack pattern, and ducks low under a sweeping blue energy slash to deliver a crackling pink counterstrike that violently clashes against the Duke's blade. The phantom leans back fluidly to dodge the follow-up, flashing a grin of genuine approval, completely shocked that a supposed dark mage possesses such high-level swordsmanship as the 2 trade hits in a rapid flurry of sparks. Klein seamlessly strings together the combat techniques he stole from watching Delane, Dalton, Heinkel and Garrison in action. Our guy's eye flares with that signature purple crosshair as he prepares to seamlessly weave those stolen moves into a real-time combo, but Rudol just flashes a sharp smirk warning the kid that parlor tricks won't be enough. Claiming to see right through his defenses, the Phantom swings a massive blue energy blade downward, forcing Klein to fall backward and sending a sheer wave of destructive aura erupting across the mausoleum grounds. But as the dust clears, the Duke's fiery expression shifts into sudden surprise. 200 years ago, the original Archimond leaped down to strike him on the battlefield with this exact same maneuver. Capitalizing on the opening, our boy leaps through the night air to aim a lethal strike right at the Phantom's back, but Rudol easily anticipates the maneuver. Spinning around and intercepting the blade in a blinding mid-air shockwave of light, the blast repels Klein, who slides backward across the grass and plants his sword to stabilize himself, while the blue flame entity pauses to admit he's genuinely surprised. To take all of his techniques head-on with a body completely devoid of mana is no small feat, and the teen just glares intensely, sweating as he listens to the Phantom's evaluation. Once, long before any of this, Rudol Rhineland was the 6th Duke, a man who held the title of the strongest knight on the continent, with the source of his legendary prestige lying entirely in his unique swordsmanship. Floating above the cratered mausoleum grounds, Rudol takes a second to roast his own son Heinkel's absolute zero intuition, joking that the man would pass out if he realized the kid he's raising is actually the legendary Archimond. A jab our boy casually agrees with, tossing the insult right back at the Phantom's own oblivious nature, which only makes the flaming entity laugh at the undeniable familial resemblance in the kid's sheer arrogance. But the banter dies as the Duke's glowing yellow eye narrows, dark blue energy flaring wildly around his muscular frame as he crouches low to declare he is done holding back, and Klein's eyes widen the second he recognizes the stance. The blue flame Phantom blitzes forward to unleash the tragic abandoned swordsmanship he created in life, a technique so complex that the blade's path splinters into a flawless, impossible-to-read illusion, unleashing a terrifying barrage of phantom steel designed to make it impossible to tell which attack carries actual weight. The 6th Duke plunges from the ceiling and brings his massive glowing greatsword crashing down on our hero, so Klein grits his teeth to brace himself, desperate to pick out the single real threat hidden among the fakes. His glowing eye flares as he shifts his strategy. Instead of tracking the weapon, he focuses entirely on predicting the entity's body mechanics, reading the shift in weight to lean back just in time and dodge a sweeping horizontal slash from the right, then immediately adjusts his stance to catch the obvious follow-up from the left. But his read is dead wrong because Rudol is already high in the air, launching a devastating vertical strike from his blind spot. Klein barely throws himself backward as the blue energy blade shears the air inches from his face. A heavy boot stomps the stone floor, and Rudol unleashes a massive ground strike that forces our hero to leap away from the eruption of blue energy. Skidding backward, Klein realizes the initial swing was just a setup for the most erratic combo imaginable, a fact the Phantom confirms by casually announcing his next strike is coming from behind. Our boy instantly snaps his gaze over his shoulder, pivoting just in time to catch the heavy blow on his own blade with some insane reflexes, but the Duke simply tightens his clawed grip on the hilt, and before Klein can even blink, a brutal high-speed kick catches him completely off guard. The impact sends our hero hurtling backward through the air in a massive trail of blue energy, until he crashes violently into the stone floor, kicking up a crater and a heavy cloud of debris. As the smoke dissipates, Klein coughs up blood, battered but refusing to drop his weapon, quickly realizing the Duke's overwhelming power comes entirely from technique since his spiritual body holds no more mana than a regular knight. Standing at a distance, Rudol boasts about the atrocious efficiency of his northern swordsmanship, swearing that even the greatest necromancer on the continent couldn't possibly break through it, prompting Klein to wipe the blood from his chin and admit he didn't expect to be pushed this far so quickly. But as he readies his silver sword, he declares he's officially done holding back. His eyes flare with a piercing purple light, star-shaped pupils locking onto his opponent as he flashes a smug smirk and claims he's already seen through the entire sequence. He casually taunts the Phantom, dismissing the vaunted illusion sword as a basic trick, which absolutely enrages Rudol, who grits his teeth and snarls that his life's work can't be copied from a single glance. The glowing grass rustles in the heavy silence as the two stand off across the mausoleum floor, the towering entity radiating lethal intent as he readies his massive blade. But our hero just looks back with a relaxed grin, completely unfazed, and the Duke's fiery eye narrows with menacing fury. Klein's gaze sharpens just a fraction of a second before the Phantom lunges forward with massive shadowy claws to tear him apart, but our boy easily leaps backward, throwing up a halo of jagged purple blades to cover his retreat. Rudol refuses to let up, raining down a relentless barrage of his illusion sword from above. An assault Klein instantly meets with his own volley of dark magic, sending the two forces violently colliding in midair with a deafening crack. The duel instantly devolves into a high-speed blur of close-quarters deflections that shoot up into the night sky, with the Duke warning Archimonde not to get arrogant as he aggressively presses the attack, demanding to know why the legendary Necromancer would ever help the descendants of his mortal enemy. Our boy seamlessly blocks the dual strikes with his aura-coated blade, but the Phantom catches him slightly off guard by addressing him as the Devil of the Continent. A powerful burst of dark energy erupts into the night sky, and when the light fades, blood is trickling down Klein's stoic face, because Rudol has halted his flaming sword right against the teen's forehead, though the kid doesn't even flinch, prompting the confused Sixth Duke to demand why he didn't move. He points out that Klein could have easily dodged the strike, but the boy just softly invokes the concepts of honor and faith, leaving the fiery entity completely stunned. Archimonde viewed the knight's code as a pathetic joke, and he could never understand why anyone would choose honor over survival. But that worldview shattered when he saw an armored woman who suffered the exact same pain he did, yet made the complete opposite choice just to protect the future. Stepping forward on the glowing blue ground, our hero dismisses Rudol's judgment, determined to forge his own understanding of honor, staring down the blade of blue flame to tell the Phantom he wants to see that promised future for himself. The towering entity stares back in solemn silence, finally revealing that a lingering regret he refuses to share is the only reason he became a Phantom. But as his fiery weapon wavers, he hints at a new possibility. Won over by the potential in the boy's vision, the Sixth Duke makes his final decision, officially declaring that he will accept a contract with him, while Klein just stands there in silence, processing the massive victory. A satisfied smirk spreads across our boy's battered face, and reaching out a hand crackling with blue magical energy, he agrees to shoulder the burden of the terms, but instead of forcing a subordinate bind, he insists on a mutual contract, refusing to disrespect his ancestor and proving he isn't just some one-dimensional villain. Surrounded by a halo of floating runes, Rudol formally entrusts his wishes to the guide, and bathed in the ethereal light, Klein completes the incantation, officially cementing the bond using his past life's name, Archimonde. The two reach toward the hovering magic circle, vowing to light each other's paths until their ambitions are fulfilled, and a massive burst of azure energy erupts through the mausoleum as the legendary alliance is struck. Outside, the bright full moon shines down through the wispy clouds, marking a quiet end to the clash. Now bound by the contract, Rudol ominously asks if the kid is truly prepared for the consequences of turning him into a monster, but Klein just smiles confidently, asserting that a spirit shouldn't worry about the living. Standing triumphantly with the terrifying Death Knight looming behind him, our hero sets his sights on his next target, Grand Duchess Hellion. 3 days after securing that legendary alliance, the sheer physical toll of the ritual finally catches up to our boy, And he is so dead to the world that Aaron has to playfully smack a book against his face just to check if he's actually kicked the bucket, which, given those massive dark circles, is a pretty fair question. Forging a mutual contract with a literal Death Knight drained every last drop of his magi, leaving his stamina completely tanked. With a long trip to house Paul Wyvern ahead of them, Klein just wants to catch up on his sleep, but Aaron is starting to get highly suspicious of his sudden sickly behavior. He nervously sweats and tries to brush it off as a bad bout of insomnia, but the sharp-eyed maid glares right through the lie. Cornered, he pivots to claiming he's just been bogged down with late-night research, an excuse that instantly crumbles when she holds up his text and points out he's been staring at the exact same page for days. Our boy panics and lunges for the tome, desperate to hide the fact that she's pointing dead center at a Death Knight summoning circle. But before he can snatch it back, Dellen's stern voice echoes across the room, demanding to know what he's been doing all alone at dawn. The older brother offers nothing but an intimidating stare, and the heavy silence makes our hero practically jump out of his skin. He sweats bullets, absolutely terrified that Dellen overheard the whole slip-up, and by the time he runs into Dunkel out in the hallway, he's a stammering mess. The brutal torture he'll face from the scarred Inquisitor is practically guaranteed if word gets out that he turned his own ancestor into an undead minion. He resolves to take this deadly secret to his grave, but Dunkel suddenly cuts his stammering excuse short with a heavy hand on his shoulder. To our boy's absolute shock, Dellen steps up and gently tells him there's no need to be ashamed. Klein breathes a massive sigh of relief, convinced he's somehow off the hook, right up until he actually processes his older brother's exact phrasing. Dellen kneels down to look Aaron in the eye and explains with a knowing smile that the young master is just going through a very important phase. Aaron tilts her head, completely lost, and innocently asks if the young master is going to look this sickly forever. Dellen confidently chalks the exhaustion up to the vigorous energy of puberty, leaving the actual ancient necromancer utterly bewildered. Our boy frantically tries to clear up the massive misunderstanding, but his brother just shoots him a reassuring thumbs up and calls it a totally normal stage for every growing man. Blushing furiously, Klein screams that he absolutely isn't doing that all alone in his room at night. But Dellen just laughs it off and walks away to cheerfully report this joyous occasion to the Duke. Dunkel smugly agrees that it's his solemn duty as an escort knight to spread the good news, and helpfully points out that young Delane went through this exact same phase, which just leaves our boy utterly horrified. With a swift farewell, the knight shuts the door, leaving Klein to seriously regret not turning him into a silent Death Knight instead. Desperate to kill the rumors before they spread, he bursts into the next room looking for the loudmouth, but freezes in his tracks when he spots Captain Laya standing there. The blonde knight just stares back at him, perfectly composed. She casually drops that she's here to collect him personally, which sends our boy's mind racing, since today is his scheduled visit with Grand Duchess Hellion, meaning there is absolutely no reason a high-ranking knight commander should be playing the role of a glorified escort. He nervously asks if she heard his embarrassing little chat, but she coldly brushes off his private affairs, and as they walk out to the courtyard, the terrifying reality clicks into place. Hellion wields so much absolute power that she can treat the young lady of House Paul Wyvern like a simple errand runner. Stepping into his carriage, my guy resolves to firmly establish his dominance on this trip to counter the Grand Duchess's growing threat, fully prepared to drop his new Death Knight as a trump card, until a sudden guest interrupts his plotting. But his grand strategy hits a speed bump when Laya climbs directly into his carriage instead of taking her own. She casually explains that Aaron excitedly opted to ride up front on horseback, and when the Knight Commander offers to take the other coach instead, our hero firmly shuts the idea down. He decides they will just leave as is, only to flinch as the heavy door suddenly slams shut. Now trapped alone in a confined space with the intimidating blonde, my guy breaks into a nervous sweat. The political landscape of House Paul Wyvern is a mess, split right down the middle following the previous Duke's sudden death. On one side sits the Grand Duchess faction led by Hellion, while the opposing conservative faction is commanded by Laya herself. His political musings are instantly shattered when Laya drops a bombshell, bluntly ordering him to take off his clothes. A heavy, awkward silence fills the carriage, until our hero just stares at her like she's lost her mind and flat out asks why. As the wheels rattle down the bumpy dirt road, he seriously wonders if he's cursed today, realizing this suffocating tension feels exactly like their last encounter, and he sarcastically asks if the Knight Commander is committing highway robbery. Deciding to probe for information, he demands a proper reason for telling a Rhineland to strip, to which her expression hardens as she asks if he has any idea what's been happening outside their borders. She recalls how it started the day people mysteriously began going on rampages, wielding abnormal monstrous strength. Back in the present, our boy crosses his arms and asks what any of that has to do with his clothes. The blonde commander points out the glaring contradiction of his trial performance, how a kid with soft hands somehow beat down an imperial knight, and reveals that every single berserker they've found shares one physical symptom: bulging blue veins. The realization hits him that she suspects him of using this dark power. Since he can't exactly admit his mimicry eyes are doing the heavy lifting, he decides to play along with a philosophical deflection. He waxes poetic about how quickly people can change and chalks his sudden mastery of the blade up to sheer talent, effort, and desperate necessity, leaving Laya to silently process the lecture. But Laya instantly shatters his cool speech with a brutal reality check. He is still shorter than her. She ruthlessly roasts his narrow shoulders and complete lack of physical growth. So our boy desperately deflects by bringing up the recent trial by combat. He reminds her about a certain bet she made to give him her lips if he won, watching the flustered knight try to deny it before the tense interrogation devolves into a childish screaming match. Pressing his advantage, he relentlessly teases her for going back on her word as a proud leader, leveraging his past life mental age to completely turn the tables by yelling that she should take her own clothes off first, which naturally leads to another heavy, awkward silence falling over the carriage. The awkward silence is finally broken when Aaron glances back in surprise, as the carriage violently rattles over a rough patch in the road. Laya uses the distraction to regain her composure, and firmly states that she has absolutely no personal interest in his physique. She only wanted to clear her suspicions. Our boy isn't letting her off the hook that easily, so he leans in to ask what happens if she's completely mistaken. Pushed into a corner by her own knightly pride, the commander resolutely promises to take full responsibility for her disrespect. Klein quietly processes the bold claim, and a sly smirk creeps onto his face as he tells her he'll be looking forward to it. The carriage finally arrives at the massive house Paul Wyvern estate, and as they step out onto the pristine grounds, Aaron immediately marvels at the sheer, towering scale of the place. Our hero steps up beside her to agree, pointing out that the property easily dwarfs their own home by at least 3 times, and his eyes narrow as he cynically takes in the overwhelming stench of old money. It's practically a palace, a blatant showcase of the Paul Wyvern Duchy's true wealth. But as they walk toward the entrance, Klein realizes Laya has completely vanished. Just as an older man's voice calls his name, he turns in surprise to find a formally dressed elder who bows low and introduces himself as Gordon, the head butler. The teen politely returns the greeting, forcing Aaron into a bow beside him while she cheekily announces that her young master is going through puberty. The older man politely invites them inside, leading the way into a grand hall bustling with formal guests. As our boy navigates the crowd with his small entourage, Gordon remarks that it's been a very long time since a Rhineland graced these halls, and suggests that the young master's arrival might finally resolve the concerns the late Duke carried to his grave. Klein silently analyzes the unprompted confession, wondering if this loyal aide is subtly offering himself up as an ally. Our guy decides to press his luck and ask exactly how the late Duke passed away, only to be cut off by a voice ringing out from the balcony above. A mysterious figure peers down from behind a dark fan, remarking that he looks exactly like his mother. The gathered nobles immediately break into shocked murmurs as they realize who just stepped out of the shadows, prompting a guard to bark for the room's attention and command every single guest to bow for the Grand Duchess. But as the entire hall obediently lowers their heads, Klein boldly remains standing tall. He stares right back at the woman he came to meet, waiting in absolute silence as she lowers her fan to speak, and Grand Duchess Hellion, the imposing leader of the Branch family faction, formally welcomes her beloved nephew to the Lion's Den. Standing in the misty blue-lit realm of his newly contracted Death Knight, to reiterate the core of their unholy pact, his ultimate goal was the absolute revival of House Rhineland, and to achieve that he had to face his current enemy. At the bottom of the grand staircase, he faces the Death Knight's own daughter, Grand Duchess Hellion, a ruthless powerhouse who seized control of the political world with her unshakable composure, allied with the Empire, and orchestrated the complete downfall of the main house. So now, as the undisputed leader of the Branch family, she coldly commands him to approach. Whispers immediately break out among the estate's staff as he enters the massive hall, with servants mocking his childhood claims of being the legendary Archimond. But before the tension can build, his escort Laya asks for her next orders. So my guy simply points at a table of treats, a distraction that works perfectly, sending the easily sidetracked Knight Commander happily running off so he can face the Lion's Den alone. Stepping deeper into the opulent estate, he finds a massive feast already laid out for the occasion, and takes his seat at the far end of the ridiculously long dining table, flanked by heavily armed guards, to formally greet his aunt, who calmly tells him to sit, while Hector Ross Paul Wyvern, the heir to the estate, stands right behind her, letting Klein immediately clock the glaring hostility radiating off the kid. Suddenly, a dark voice echoes in his mind as the Death Knight manifests in a burst of blue flames to deliver a stern warning: do not force him to cut down his own daughter. Completely oblivious to the undead spirit looming over the room, Hellion asks if anything is making him uncomfortable and maintains a perfect facade of warm hospitality, but my guy just glances at the sheer number of soldiers lining the walls. The hostility at this table is so thick our guy can practically feel the aggro, picturing a dozen invisible blades pointed straight at his neck. The Grand Duchess tries to break the ice, smiling as she remarks on how much our boy has grown, leaning in to note that his striking eyes are a perfect copy of his late mother's. But Klein isn't here for a family reunion, coldly deflecting the emotional manipulation by stating he has absolutely no memories of the woman, and bluntly tells his host to drop the sweet act and get straight to the point. Setting her black fan on the table with a sharp click, Hellion clarifies that she isn't trying to buy his favor. She is officially offering him a chance to abandon the sinking ship of Rhineland and come directly under her wing. Back then, she had kept close tabs on his brutal victories, perfectly aware of how he defeated an imperial knight and brought Count Conwell to his knees, knowing he achieved all of that terrifying destruction entirely on his own. The Grand Duchess justifies her betrayal by claiming the main house is far too weak to survive on its name alone, prompting our hero to immediately challenge her logic, asking if giving up their pride to become the Empire's dog is supposed to be any better. Hellion calmly accepts the insult as a servant pours her wine, comparing the northern duchies to mere droplets of water, and just like a droplet, she explains, a family loses its individual form the moment it joins a massive river. But its existence doesn't simply vanish. Swirling her dark goblet, the Grand Duchess hints that someday that single droplet might just make the entire river flow backward, a confession that lets our boy instantly piece together her true ambition to use the Empire to seize ultimate power, and he deliberately mocks her double-dealing out loud, infuriating the arrogant Branch family members at the table. But Hellion just ignores their outrage, leaning in to promise Klein something money can't buy if he abandons his sinking house to join her side. She offers him time. In the reflection of her glass, even the legendary Archimund and the hero Burkal eventually fade away before its absolute power. But the Grand Duchess claims to possess a secret power that can offset that decay, and she offers to share it if he simply submits. So our boy studies her calm gaze, realizing she isn't bluffing about having something up her sleeve, and slowly reaches for his wine glass, casually flicking his finger to tip the crystal over and let the dark liquid spill across the table, a pointed metaphor that makes Hellion's eyes widen in surprise as he boldly declares he has zero intention of handing his family over to anyone else to ruin, leaving her staring at him, genuinely shocked by the unprecedented refusal, while Klein just flashes a smug smile and tells her there's a first time for everything. The tense silence instantly shatters, and heavy footsteps echo across the hall, as the heir of the house, Hector, marches right up to the table, drawing his sword and pressing the blade dangerously close to our boy's neck, to demand he drop to his knees to beg for his mother's forgiveness. But Klein just stands up to casually mock the guy for being a massive mama's boy, which prompts Hector to sneer right back and strike a deep nerve by pointing out that a bastard who grew up without a mother could never understand. A violent metallic crash suddenly echoes through the dining hall, making Hector flinch as a condescending voice cuts him off, and he watches our boy casually scrape a fork against the drawn blade, mocking the guy's atrocious table manners as they lock eyes in a deadly standoff. The heir is furious at being treated like a child by someone his own age, but the reincarnated Necromancer just doubles down and lets his ancient soul shine through to call him a mouthy brat, until Hellion finally raises her fan to order her son to stand down, forcing the youth to reluctantly apologize even as his knuckles turn white around his sword. But Hector refuses to let the insult slide, raising his weapon with a vow to take at least one of the guests' hands and lunges forward, completely shattering the massive dining table as our hero leaps back, where the angry heir uses his mana to levitate the golden cutlery right off the ruined wood, snatches a fork from the air and launches a deadly barrage of sharp projectiles that Klein effortlessly evades mid-air, letting his hand slip to his own hilt as gravity pulls him down, drawing just in time to deflect a rapid flurry of unseen strikes with a shower of sparks, until Hector suddenly closes the distance with a curved blade and catches him completely off guard. But our hero barely manages to bring his blade up to block the heavy downward slash, igniting a fierce sparks-flying duel as they lock swords and strain against each other's weight, letting Klein flash a slight smile to silently acknowledge that the heir's skills aren't just for show, before suddenly leaping backward to break the lock, and using the momentum to instantly close the gap and grab Hector right by the throat, slamming the blonde youth down with bone-rattling force and pinning him flat against the ruined dining table as he coldly quotes his aunt's philosophy right back at her. He stares down at the terrified heir, his eyes glowing with malice as he casually mentions he's just woken up from a very long nap, and arrogantly asks why he should bother wasting his time on a pathetic pest, when he could just kill him right here and now. But before our hero can make good on that lethal threat, he flinches as an overwhelming pressure spikes behind him, and a massive gauntleted hand clamps down onto his shoulder to physically halt the attack, As Grand Duchess Hellion's personal knight Sanchez steps into view with a scarred glare and firmly orders him back to his seat, moving with blinding speed to effortlessly force the teen down toward the table. A sudden suppression that leaves my guy genuinely shocked since he didn't even sense the man's presence until the grip was already locked in. Grand Duchess Hellion watches the suppression in dead silence from the head of the table, and our boy decides it's smarter to just cool down for now rather than burn himself out fighting her entire guard. So the crushing pressure finally lifts off his chest, as the wavy-haired heir reluctantly steps back, muttering that his mother might have shown mercy, but his knuckles turn white around the hilt of his weapon, and with a furious scream Hector lunges right back in for a cowardly sneak attack, only for the golden blade to stop a single inch from our hero's eye. Laia suddenly crashes into the fray, sending the heir flying backward with a brutal punch while the towering Death Knight materializes to shield his master, leaving Klein to just stare up at the blonde knight commander in mild disbelief, as she looks down at him and firmly declares she's here to take responsibility for her rudeness in the carriage. As the dust settles in the grand dining hall, our boy is momentarily stunned by the knight commander's intervention, as a brief memory flashes back to the carriage ride where she promised to take responsibility if she misjudged his strength. She steps right past the bewildered heir, who furiously demands to know why she's shielding a bastard that just insulted their mother and their house. Laia coldly shuts him down, stating that a man who draws a sword on a guest has no right to speak of authority, before leaning in to bluntly remind him of the humiliating truth that he was the one who just got subdued. The heir's eyes go wide in utter shock, but before he can even stammer out a defense, a chilling voice cuts through the room. Grand Duchess Hellion sighs at the ruined dinner, her eyes glowing as a suffocating red aura suddenly floods the hall, a wave of raw killing intent that instantly paralyzes her own son in his tracks. Even our boy has to internally marvel at the sheer crushing pressure she commands with a single word, while Laia remains entirely unfazed, offering a crisp bow to apologize for the mess. Hellion narrows her eyes, delivering a pointed warning about exactly whose side the blonde knight is choosing to protect, but Laia smoothly deflects the threat by citing her sworn duty to ensure the safety of all guests. With the tension formally diffused, she calls her blue Holy Spear knights to attention and orders the armored ranks to prepare for tomorrow's training. As she commands the room with effortless authority, our hero finally grasps the true weight of her title. Laia Wren Paul Wyvern, the formidable first daughter and knight commander. Shortly after the chaotic dinner, Laia paces through the quiet halls of the estate, dismissing the armored guards stationed at her door and slipping into the privacy of her room. The moment the lock clicks shut, her stoic facade crumbles into a heavy sigh of relief. She quietly asks her absent father if she did well today, until the crushing stress of her position finally boils over. Known throughout the West for her cold-blooded combat prowess, the fearsome knight commander reaches for a thick rope hanging in the corner, but she isn't preparing for a workout. With a heavy pull, a hidden mechanism activates to reveal a secret wall, and her entire demeanor instantly melts into that of a blushing, starry-eyed fangirl. The hidden space is a massive, obsessive shrine dedicated entirely to Lord Archimond, fully stocked with hand-drawn portraits and dubious bone artifacts she bought at auction. The collection features stacks of biographies and framed sketches, but the undeniable crown jewel of her hoard is her absolute most prized possession, a custom handmade double-sided Archimond body pillow. She squeezes the cushion tight, complaining that historians always get his face and clothes completely wrong, and admits she had to design this masterpiece herself just to match her own specific tastes. In her highly romanticized, delusional mind, the terrifying devil of the continent is actually a sparkling, handsome savior, but the fantasy is abruptly cut short when she accidentally squirts black ink straight into her own eye. She curses so loudly that the maids stationed out in the hall jump in confusion. Exhausted, Laia kicks off her boots and slumps to the floor, hugging her plushie as she confesses a deep envy. She admires how Archimond lived true to his own name despite the world's hatred, and she laments that he disappeared before she was even born, until a voice calls out from the hallway, nearly giving her a heart attack. She scrambles to hide her embarrassing secret and salvage her dignity as knight commander, only to realize it's our guy Klein asking to come in. Outside her door, our boy figures. Simply expressing his gratitude for saving his neck from Hector is the safest approach, but the moment it swings open, he is met with a wall of silent scrutiny. The knight commander stares him down as she mentally reviews the childhood rumors that he is actually Archimond's reincarnation, dismissing his lack of mana to focus entirely on his rapid physical growth. More importantly, she remembers the predatory look in his eyes during the trial by combat, and with him sharing the same dangerous bloodline as Hellion, she resolves to never drop her guard. That stare down is hilariously shattered when Aaron bursts into the room, sending Laia into a panic while the maid marvels at the size of her quarters. Ignoring the chaos, Klein steps inside to sincerely thank his cousin, fully acknowledging the massive political risk she took by defying Hellion to protect him, which causes her guard to drop slightly out of relief that he only came to express his gratitude. until my guy immediately pivots and catches her completely off guard by proposing a deal. He recalls a quiet chat he had earlier that day with head butler Gordon, where he learned that the previous duke's sudden passing was highly suspicious, with Hellion conveniently acting as the sole witness. Armed with this intel, our hero points out they share the exact same enemy. He asks the Knight Commander to hand over the Branch family's resources, promising to use them to shatter Hellion's grip on the estate. He emphasizes that he isn't looking for a formal house alliance, just a temporary pragmatic partnership, pressing her for an answer since neither of them has anything to lose. But instead of eagerly agreeing, Laya steps protectively into his space. As Aaron watches the strange dynamic in total confusion, the blonde knight deduces that Klein only sought her out because he knew the dark truth about her father's death, and she clenches her fist, thoroughly disgusted by his cold assumption that her trauma makes her an easy pawn. Glaring right into his eyes, she delivers a piercing accusation. He's exactly like Hellion, only ever calculating how to exploit a wound the second he sees it. The harsh truth hits our boy like a truck, forcing him to genuinely question if his ruthless pragmatism makes him no different from the monstrous Grand Duchess. But before he can even process this existential crisis, Aaron suddenly shouts from the doorway. Completely oblivious to the heavy tension, the maid holds up a ragged purple-haired doll she found on the floor. She innocently calls it a cute frog, while Laya internally screams in panic, and Klein just deadpans that it's incredibly ugly. The blonde knight frantically sprints across the room and snatches the handmade toy out of the maid's hands, hugging it to her chest with a furiously blushing face. Her desperate need to protect the ugly rag doll is a glaring red flag, and our boy's eyes narrow in suspicion. He demands to see it, but she aggressively orders him out, her panic spiking as she warns him not to touch the twisted cord hanging on the wall, which naturally prompts Klein to immediately reach out and pull it. The blinds roll up with a sudden clatter. The sudden light exposes a bizarre candle-lit shrine packed with skulls, pentagrams, and crude artwork. While Aaron just tilts her head in confusion at the creepy display, our boy is struck by a profound horror. He stares at the childlike scribbles of a man in dark armor, glances at the framed portrait sitting proudly on the desk, and feels a sickening realization wash over him as he connects the dots. The ugly doll, the crude drawings, the bone armor. He realizes with soul-crushing dread that this entire embarrassing fan shrine is dedicated to him. The absolute nightmare peaks when Aaron holds up a massive sparkling body pillow, causing our hero to physically gag at the heavily romanticized depiction of his past life. Laya is left completely paralyzed, and her mind short-circuits as her deepest, most humiliating secret is laid bare before the very boy she was trying to intimidate. Trembling with rage, Klein turns to the mortified Knight Commander and furiously demands to know why she has a room full of loser-looking drawings of his face. But before he can order the merchandise burned, she slaps a hand over his mouth to shut him up. Suddenly, that earlier clash in the dining room makes a whole lot more sense. Laya slapped our boy and screamed at him to never insult Lord Archimond. It wasn't out of noble duty or some grand political maneuvering. She was just violently defending her favorite idol. Meanwhile, a heavy thunderstorm rages outside the estate. Hector groans from the floor, stewing in the bitter humiliation of his defeat, completely unable to comprehend why his own Knight Commander would step in to protect our hero. But as he desperately cries out to his mother, the Grand Duchess simply watches from the shadows, her glowing eyes promising that this deadly political game is far from over. Grand Duchess Hellion makes good on her terrifying aura immediately, lifting Hector completely off the floor by his throat. The disgraced heir dangles helplessly, desperately kicking his feet as his mother's iron grip tightens and she glares at him with pure killing intent, demanding to know if he realizes the colossal mess he just made. Reflected in his terrified eyes, she doesn't even look human anymore, just a towering monstrous shadow ready to devour him. She tears into the boy for drawing his blade in front of the conservative faction and provoking a fight he had zero chance of winning, only to need Laya to bail him out. Dripping with bitter disappointment, she finally releases her hold, dropping him to the stone where he desperately clutches his bruised neck and hacks for air. The Grand Duchess coldly looks down at him, lamenting that he ruined such a rare opportunity to dine with her nephew, and as she turns her back to walk away, Hector calls out to her in desperation. He frantically tries to justify his outburst, claiming he was only defending her honor after Klein disrespected her, pleading that his devotion as a son comes before his duty as an heir. Tears stream down his face as he screams in anguish over her taking a stranger's side instead of his own. A raw, emotional demand to know why she doesn't love him, which simply makes Hellion pause and calmly state that she loves him more than anyone in the world. But as her eye flares with a menacing purple glow, she ruthlessly adds that right now his affection is completely useless to her, and without missing a beat she orders him away to the distant fortress city of Garland. Framing the sudden exile as a prestigious promotion, the young heir breaks into a cold sweat, instantly seeing through the lie as she looms over him like a shadowy giant, ready to discard him entirely. So terrified for his life, he swallows his pride and resolves to become a more useful pawn, bowing deeply in total submission as he accepts his banishment. Later, standing alone in her dimly lit study, Hellion calls out to the empty shadows. Heavy footsteps echo as her personal knight, Sanchez, steps into the moonlight to answer the summons. He formally acknowledges his master, and she immediately orders him to contact a clandestine group known as the Fallen Leaves. The scarred warrior tenses, seeking clarification on the ominous request, but she doesn't mince words, making it crystal clear she wants our boy and his maid permanently deleted from the server. Sanchez volunteers to handle the job himself, and Hellion assures him she has total faith in his abilities. She remembers how, years ago, he single-handedly turned the tide of battle at Carmen Gorge. Back in the present, she decides against a direct assassination, noting that our boy's status in the main family makes it too risky, so she orders her knight to just stay close and monitor the situation. The scarred warrior formally accepts the command and silently slips out into the night, leaving the Grand Duchess alone by the window. The room falls dead silent as the dark-haired woman stands in the shadows. She slowly turns and approaches her ornate desk, pulls open a hidden drawer, and stares down at her prize in quiet contemplation. She lifts an ornate glass bottle filled with a glowing blood-red liquid, and without a second thought, downs the entire potion as a massive, terrifying red aura instantly erupts around her. The physical toll is violent, twisting her features as thick veins bulge grotesquely across her neck and jaw, and her eye snaps open to reveal a bright red demonic slit. Bathed in an eerie purple glow, the Grand Duchess accepts our boy's defiance, glaring menacingly as she issues a deadly ultimatum for him to prove he's actually worth keeping alive before she vanishes into the shadows with a quiet rustle of fabric. Meanwhile, back in Laya's room, an incredibly awkward silence settles over the space as our boy facepalms in sheer exasperation, while the Knight Commander suddenly freezes, staring at her own trembling hand in panic, as the reality of what she just did sets in. Realizing she just totally blew her stoic cover in front of young Master Klein, she scrambles for a flimsy excuse, sweating profusely as she blurts out a desperate lie that the devil of the continent is actually the person she despises most in the world. When that only leads to another painful lull, she frantically pivots to justifying her massive Archimonde shrine, swearing up and down that the embarrassing merch is strictly historical research to study her enemy. Internally, she's terrified that if he breathes a word of this to anyone, her fearsome reputation will be ruined forever. She keeps rambling through her flimsy cover story, but our boy just stares at her in silent judgment. He points to the red slap mark still stinging his cheek to question her bizarre definition of historical research, and starts sweating nervously as the reality of this unpredictable situation sets in. He glances at the framed portraits of his past self, genuinely curious if this is just how people express hatred these days. Then, remembering the force of that blow, the Knight Commander suddenly looks like a hulking, muscular monster to him. Panic washes over him at the thought of the mortal danger he'd face if this obsessed fangirl ever found out he was actually the real Archimonde. But the dread is abruptly broken when Aaron holds up the crude little doll and innocently points out that it looks exactly like him, prompting both Klein and Laya to aggressively scream in denial. The maid drops the toy in surprise, and a heavy, awkward silence falls over the room. Our boy immediately tries to abort the mission, dragging Aaron across the floor to escape the cringe, but Laya calls out to stop him. Standing behind him, she officially accepts his proposed alliance, offering a rare moment of humility to apologize for the slap and admit he was right all along. She knows she can't take down Hellion on her own, and needs to put her useless ego aside. Klein turns back, ready to hammer out the terms of their agreement, but suddenly changes his mind and calls the whole thing off, leaving the Knight Commander completely baffled. Our boy admits that the distressed look on her face earlier is actually bothering him, and recalling how she compared him to Hellion, he shows a rare flash of empathy, refusing to drag her into his war if it means she'll look at him like a monster. He tells her to take her time and not rush the decision, but as he speaks, Laya is suddenly struck by an uncanny visual overlap between this teen and her revered Lord Archimonde. She blushes furiously, completely flustered by the profound connection she just saw, while Klein, totally unaware of her internal crisis, just apologizes for the awkward encounter and turns to leave. The Knight Commander tries to ground herself, desperately clinging to the fact that he's just the ruthless guy who tried to exploit her pain moments ago. But before he can walk out the door, our boy stops and pitches a true formal alliance instead of a fragile, transactional deal. Laya weighs the practical foundation of their mutual dependence. He points out that a simple arrangement ends the second it becomes inconvenient, whereas a real partnership requires absolute commitment. He asks if they shouldn't be able to entrust their backs to each other in the battles ahead. Clenching her fist, the Knight Commander finally accepts that her idealized idol is truly gone, and she looks directly into his eyes to formally ask him to be her ally. He just stands there, silently processing the weight of her sincere request. She quickly backpedals, defensively claiming she's only agreeing because it feels right for the moment. The word ally echoes in our boy's mind, a concept he's inherently cautious to trust, but pragmatically, he decides it's not a terrible arrangement. He extends his hand to officially accept the partnership, and Laya assures him that he won't regret his choice, even if they both know this pragmatic truce will have to end someday. Their grip tightens to seal the deal, and Klein's mind is already racing ahead to his next move. Meanwhile, rats scurry across the stone floor of a damp underground dungeon. As water rushes through the eerie tunnel, an armored boot splashes heavily into the flooded path, and Sanchez emerges, disguised under a thick hooded cloak to wade through the muck. He approaches a raised platform at the end of the secretive route, where a massive metal door slowly groans open, and the knight steps into a pitch-black corridor, his scarred face completely swallowed by the shadows. Deep inside the hidden chamber, he reaches into his heavy robes, pulling out a single gold coin to state his business. He places the gold on the ledge of a dark metallic slot in the wall, where a monstrous pale hand with sharp black claws immediately slithers out to snatch the payment. A hidden voice rasps from the dark asking for the target, and the knight doesn't hesitate, ordering the assassination of our boy before pulling back his hood to reveal his scarred face and ruthlessly expanding the contract to include Aaron. A heavy wooden door creaks open to reveal a hidden passage, where an elderly, hunched guide leads Sanchez down a stone-walled corridor. The old man explains that the notorious Fallen Leaves assassins strictly operate without face-to-face contact, and he hands the knight a magical scroll to establish a remote connection before hobbling away. Sanchez steps onto a massive, intricate magic circle and is warned to keep his eyes shut under any circumstances, so he crouches low as a violent cloud of shadowy energy erupts from the floor, until the magical darkness rapidly expands to swallow him whole. With his eyes tightly shut, a shadowy figure manifests in the smoke behind the scarred knight, confirming the requested elimination targets as our boy and his maid. But taking out targets under Laya's protection means bypassing her entire knight order, so the entity demands a massive premium, a steep price Sanchez agrees to without hesitation as he pulls out a glowing red and gold potion bottle. He reveals it as a priceless imperial artifact, promising 10 more just like it once the hit is complete. The contact flashes a glowing smile, locking in the contract and deploying 3 elite assassins from the Fallen Leaves to wipe them out. Meanwhile, a heavy thunderstorm rages outside the Paul Wyvern estate as a ghostly, translucent woman silently phases through the glass door of the guest room. This is a banshee, a high-tier scouting spirit, and she floats right up to whisper her findings directly into Klein's ear. The ethereal entity relays every detail of the clandestine meeting and projects a perfect replay of Hellion's orders and Sanchez's plot to bypass Laya's protection. Our hero just sits back in his chair, silently taking in the grim news. He realizes the Grand Duchess has finally played her hand, right as 3 masked assassins from the Fallen Leaves touch down outside in the pouring rain. But instead of panicking, my guy just flashes a sinister grin and eagerly prepares to welcome his new guests with a little necromancy.